Hey everyone, hope you're all doing great. Welcome back to the Anime Fictions 2.0. Today, we're diving into part 4 of What If Naruto's isolation made him a cold, strategic ninja. If you're enjoying these alternate timelines, make sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, and check out the other videos on the channel. And of course, drop your thoughts in the comments. I always love hearing your ideas. Alright, enough talk, let's get into the story. Chapter 36, Empty Heart. On the first day of the second test of the Chunin exams. It was the first time in a while that a messenger bird with an urgent summons to the Hokage's council had tapped on the shoulder of every veteran jonin in the village. Heeding the call, the chamber was soon filled with clouds of smoke from multiple jonin bodies flickering in. One of the Chunin exam proctors had reported to the Hokage her shocking findings of a team of faceless corpses. The photo evidence was now presented to the jonin. While disturbed, most of them seemed blissfully ignorant of its implications. However, a select few immediately turned pale. The vanishing facial copy technique. But that can't be. Predictably, it was Anko who would baldly spit out the name of the culprit. Orochimaru. That snake is back. Yes, said the Hokage. I too believe he has returned. It cannot be a coincidence that this has happened in the midst of the Chunin exams, when our village is filled with foreign ninja. Should we cancel the exams then? No, Orochimaru knows that this technique would give him away in an instant. And yet, he left those bodies out in plain view. He is challenging us, and losing our composure is not the right choice to make here. But Hokage-sama, that means our suspicions are true and that Akatsuki is involved. The Hokage's face turned grim. If only that was the least of it. We have reason to suspect that Orochimaru is connected to not just Akatsuki but other hidden villages, perhaps even our allies. You think our allies would partner with Akatsuki and betray Konoha? Well, the treaties of alliance are really no more than verbal agreements, Kakashi interjected. It's just like the world wars of the past. In any case, right now we still have too little information. We must not make too many assumptions. The Konoha councilwoman added, We have already dispatched ANBU Black Ops to each nation to gather intelligence. It is imperative that we not make a single careless move. Our enemies will pounce on any such opportunity. The Hokage looked around at his agents. I have the utmost confidence in all of you. If it comes to it, we shall consolidate all of the Hidden Leaf's strength and fight. It was cold. Snow drifted down from the sky, covering the bridge in white and melting away where it touched his bare skin. A cold wind brushed against him. He shivered. But he had nowhere to go. The blood on his face had long since dried up and crusted over. He was all alone. The snow continued to drift by. Slowly. Serenely. He wondered if he closed his eyes, would the rest of the world disappear? Suddenly, a dark shadow fell on him, and he looked up. There was a tall man there, a ninja. Bandages covered most of his face, leaving just a pair of dark eyes. The man spoke in a low, brusque voice. Do you want to be needed by someone? Can you give everything to me? In a trance, he stood up. His eyes fixed on the face of the ninja before him, he felt his heart throb. He took a step and another, and then the man rested his hand on the top of his head. His eyes filled with tears. It had been too long since he last saw the man. He felt the man pull him to his side. But when the man spoke again, it was a hiss. Come find me when your own strength can take you no further. His heart dropping in his chest, he looked up and instead of a bandaged face, he saw now the head of a snake, its maw opened with wicked fangs bearing down on him. Haku! Shouted a familiar voice. Ajisai? Everything was blurry. His head was spinning. One moment, a snake was about to tear into him, the next, his teammate was standing over him. But it was too painful to think to be awake. Haku felt everything fade away into black. Unlike the Chunin promotion, which hinged on the evaluation of the host village conducting the Chunin exam, the Jonin promotion was by appointment of one's own Kage only. It was also a much more subdued ceremony. Naruto distinctly remembered the excessively elaborate sand structures from his own Chunin certification event. Do you swear your loyalty to the village of Konohagakure and to the incumbent Hokage? Yes. Do you swear to protect the village and its people, and to take its secrets to your grave? Yes. Then I appoint you, Uzumaki Naruto, to the rank of Jonin, under allegiance to the village of Konohagakure. Henceforth, you will respond solely to me, for as long as I hold the title of Hokage. Yes, Hokage-sama. Eyes beaming out from below his hat, the Hokage regarded Naruto proudly. You've done well. Minato and Kushina would have been proud of you as would have your old teammates. Thank you. It is customary for a Jonin to go on his first mission solo. That being said, the Hokage's smile faded. I have a pertinent update for you, Naruto. I have received information that all but confirms that the Akatsuki have started to make a move against the Hidden Leaf. Akatsuki, the mercenary group that was hunting down Jinchuriki. He'd encountered 2 of their members in Wave Country. Even with the power of the Nine Tails, he'd barely managed to kill one of them. And now, it seemed they were bearing down on Fire Country. Perhaps sensing Naruto's unspoken questions, the Hokage continued. I have decided not to cancel the Chunin exams. However, in order to gather more information, I have sent out many operatives, and this concerns my urgent mission for you. You will escort a medic Nin to aid a wounded undercover agent in Earth Country who may be in possession of vital information, and bring both of them back to our village before the start of the 3rd exam. This is a mission of A-rank difficulty. Discretion is the rule. The IWA Nin must never find out that we have been spying on them. You think the Akatsuki won't attack before the 3rd exam? It is unlikely. They will be waiting for when the foreign delegations have all arrived, that is, when we are at our most vulnerable. Naruto paused. While his next question was impertinent for his position, he figured they had been sidestepping the issue for long enough. Did your council request this mission from me? For a long moment, the Hokage mulled over the question on his pipe. And then he sighed. No, they did not. Given your Jinchuriki status, they would prefer to keep you close by. And I feel the same way, Naruto. You must consider me a puppet, dancing to the tune of my advisors, and by extension, the village. Perhaps over the years, that has become the case. The Hokage spread out his hands. However, putting all that aside, Naruto, you are not just a Jinchuriki. You are a Jonin now with qualifications that make you suitable for this mission. That being the case, will you accept it? The Hokage's face had been lined with wrinkles for as long as Naruto could remember. When he was a child, the Hokage had always seemed ancient, a legendary piece of history in a phrase, the god of shinobi, as some called him. As Naruto had grown older, the Hokage had become a leader behind a mask, someone with ulterior motives, someone whose true face he couldn't see. Yes, Hokage-sama, replied Naruto. An unreadable emotion flickered in the Hokage's eyes. Thank you, Naruto. As always, the small, cynical voice in Naruto told him that this show of vulnerability was yet another tool at the Hokage's disposal to bend him to his will. But in that instant, he thought he'd caught a glimpse of the face behind the mask. With the sudden change in plans, it was decided that Naruto would leave for the mission at sunset. Time was sensitive, and although getting to Earth Country on his own wouldn't have been an issue, he would have to deal with not just a medic Nin, but possibly an injured operative, all the while avoiding detection from IWA Nin. Certainly, a challenging mission for a Jonin barely 5 minutes into his initiation. Still, with Kakashi busy these days training his Chunin team, and Jiraiya having disappeared on his own business, Naruto thought it would make a nice change in pace from skulking around the village. There wasn't anything Naruto needed to pack for the mission. Over his years of travel with Jiraiya, he had learned to become self-sufficient and knew how to obtain food and shelter no matter where he went. Still, just in case. When Naruto left his apartment, his clone stared back at him just before he closed the door. As he headed to the gates, where he'd been told the medic Nin would be waiting for him, he looked up at the stone faces of the Hokage monument that bore down on the village. Several people had told Naruto that he greatly resembled his father, the 4th Hokage. It was part of the reason why he kept his hair cropped short. He had never known his father, and if he wanted to endure the world around him, he had to live his life in the present, not the past. And yet he couldn't help but think, now what? He had once wanted to become strong enough to protect those he cared about. But after Rai and Mayu had died, there was something he had realized, though he hadn't been able to put it into words at the time. No matter how strong you were, when it mattered the most, all of that power couldn't save anyone. Because in the end, everyone was alone. Naruto wasn't the only one who had lost his team. Kakashi had as well. The same could be said for Jiraiya, the Hokage. The most powerful people he knew hadn't been able to save the ones they'd wanted to protect. With all his years of experience, Kakashi had said that all they could do was to endure. That was what being a ninja meant. However, Naruto had thought there was more to it than that. That there had to be more than that. So he had traveled the world in search of all the things that he couldn't understand. But rather than finding answers, he had only found more questions. Until now, each step of his way had been obvious to him. It had been easy to move forward when he could clearly see where it would take him. But now, the way ahead was dark. Though he kept stepping forward, he no longer knew where it was that he was heading. Hyuga Hinata? At the sound of the unfamiliar voice, Hinata immediately answered, "Eyes." She turned around and felt her lips part in surprise. Him of all people? While Hinata had known that a Jonin would be escorting her on her mission, she certainly hadn't expected the village's pariah to be the one to approach her. "I'm Naruto," said the young man as though there was anyone in the village who didn't know of him. Not to mention, they'd once been in the same academy class when they were younger. "Are you ready to leave?" Swallowing, Hinata nodded. "Yes." Unceremoniously, they lined up at the exit gate, and soon, Hinata found herself trailing the Jonin along a well-trodden path. He didn't seem the talkative type, nor did she really want to hold a conversation with him. She didn't remember much of him from the short time they'd been in the same academy class, but she'd heard the stories about him from the other Chunin. While they acknowledged his skill, they all knew he wasn't someone you got involved with. There was also, of course, the one blemish on his otherwise spotless track record, the disaster of the wave incident from 3 years past. Both of Naruto's teammates had been killed in action, and though the specific details of the mission had never been released, after Naruto disappeared from the village, the majority opinion held that it had been his fault. And now he was mysteriously back and Hinata was alone with him. Naruto had been examining the map, but suddenly, he turned towards her. "You're a Chunin, right?" "Why, yes," said Hinata. Starting to feel somewhat self-conscious of her repetitive replies, she added, "Only medical ninja who have received a Chunin certification are allowed to go on missions above C rank." "I see." With that, Naruto put away his map and began to pick up his speed. It was apparent that he knew nothing about her. However, despite the fact that this was technically an escort mission, he obviously expected Hinata to carry her own weight. Somehow, that brought a small smile to her lips. It made a welcome change to be thought of in that way. In the crowds of Leaf Nin and foreign ninja alike streaming in and out of the village, nobody noticed the two Sunanins speaking quietly to one another. "Everything is in place," said Baki. "I will return to the Wind Country now to report to the Lord Fourth. Make sure to keep Gaara under control, Temari." Temari hid her frown. Her given task was far easier said than done, but it was her duty, and she would see it through. It was the least she could do while her countrymen prepared for the inevitable war that rapidly approached. "Yes, Baki. Safe travels." While she may have been the daughter of the Kazekage, she was currently no more than a glorified babysitter for Gaara. Nonetheless, they would play a critical role in their scheme against the Hidden Leaf, and if all went well, she would become a part of her father's inner circle. Of course, that was a big if. Even Temari, who only had a shadow of an idea of what was going to happen in the third exam, knew that the scale of their mission was nothing like they'd ever attempted before. The annihilation of a powerful hidden village, one of the major powers of their era. Once the dust had settled, what would the resulting world look like? By the time Temari returned to their quarters, the sun had set and the moon was a crescent in the sky. There was a dark figure standing outside the building. Temari froze, as she realized Gaara was waiting outside for her. However, a hurried glance at his face told her that perhaps with the decreasing influence of the waning moon he seemed to be in more control of himself. Slowly, she let out a breath that she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Where were you?" was his cold greeting. "I was seeing Baki off. Did you eat dinner?" Gaara didn't respond, instead looking sullenly away, meaning Temari would have to figure out dinner for the two of them. For the two of them, not for the first time that week, a haze settled over her. For all her flippancy, Matsuri, their teammate, had been a good cook. Temari would miss her miso soup, in particular. With a heavy heart, she wondered how Baki would explain Matsuri's death to her family. Would it be killed in action like last time? Of course, everyone would instantaneously guess at what had truly come to pass. These days, with so many families having lost someone to Gaara, Temari found herself purely by association being subjected to the villagers' hate-filled gazes. It hurt, when she had worked so hard and sacrificed so much for the sake of their people, but she couldn't blame them. A cloud must have covered the moon, as for a moment, everything was dark. Then the moment passed, and the glow of moonlight shone down on them. "I think I saw a ramen spot around here," said Temari, forcing herself to smile. "How does that sound to you?" As expected of a Hyuga, the medic mean with pale eyes seemed to have no trouble keeping up with Naruto's steady pace through the wilderness of Fire Country. What was more surprising to Naruto was that a member of the main house of the Hyuga clan would have deigned to join the medical field at all. While an extremely difficult and accomplished field, the main impression that he'd gotten from his limited interactions with their branch members was that they were far too proud to play a mere supporting role. They had reached the border of grass country before the day was done, and in that time, they must have exchanged only a handful of sentences between them. He could feel the waves of curiosity coming off of her, though whether out of politeness or apprehension, she didn't voice any questions. In the end, Naruto refrained from commenting on Hinata's lineage. He'd butted heads with her clansman Niji enough as it was, ever since they'd first had the misfortune to meet in their Chunin exams. It wasn't until they were well into Earth territory that they finally ran into some trouble. Though Naruto had spent a non-insignificant amount of time in the country while traveling with Jiraiya, they had usually journeyed undercover as civilians, and went out of their way to avoid clashing with the foreign power. "If you ever get into a fight with someone from Earth Country," Jiraiya would say, "you'd better plan on either losing the fight or killing them outright. Stubborn people I've ever met, and I knew your mother." "Ha! You trying to pick a fight?" said the short, weasel-looking man blocking their way across the bridge. "It's simple, you want to cross, you pay the toll." "But it doesn't say anywhere that we have to pay a toll here," protested Hinata. The man gave her the stink eye. "You two don't look like you're from around here. What would you know about how we run things? Pay the passage of 300 ryo, or I'll call the police on you, and you definitely don't want that." Naruto knew for a fact that this was a bluff. The official police force of Iwagakure didn't bother patrolling this far from the hidden village. Even if there was a local police body around this area, it was most likely a hodgepodge group of volunteers, who were at best academy level. Still, as tempting as it was, he couldn't simply overpower him. While it was unlikely any passing Iwa nin would pay attention to his blabbering, there was a much easier way to settle this matter. Naruto quickly assessed the situation. One of his clones that he'd sent out to check their surroundings was in the vicinity, and another passing traveler was approaching the bridge, making the setup complete. He pointed. "Aren't you going to charge that person too?" The weasel-like man turned around, and saw to his surprise a bald man about to step across the bridge. "Wait, stop right there. But first, you two." One hand forming the ram's seal behind his back, Naruto's other hand opened to reveal 3 gold coins that he wordlessly handed over. In a flash, the coins disappeared, and the man's menacing glare turned into a wide, beaming smile. "Have a good day." With a quick welcoming sweep towards the bridge, he scurried away towards his next bewildered victim. The golden coins rattled ominously in the man's breast pocket. "He's gone." Opening her eyes, Karen dropped to the ground. Somehow, in the short period of time while she'd been training her taijutsu, Naruto had managed to leave the village and her range. A mission? But for how long would he be gone? Suddenly, a spinning blob shot out at her. Gritting her teeth, Karen blocked the brunt of the blow with her arms, but the force still sent her reeling backwards. The blob came to a quick stop, revealing a large man with a shaved head, her teammate. Panting, Karen felt blood drip from her nose. "Burami!" she heard Kazami admonish. "I told you to hold back a little." "That's what she gets for zoning out," Burami sneered. "You've been acting uppity ever since you made the finals, Karen. But don't forget that in the end, you're only good for your chakra." Karen bristled, but as usual, her throat constricted, and she didn't say anything back. She knew she'd only regret it when they returned to grass country. Clink, clink. More and more these days, It felt like her whole body was being restrained by chains. Chains that tied her to the hidden grass, to Zosie and to herself. She hadn't felt this way back when her mother had been alive, and sometimes she wondered whether her mother had felt so trapped in her final moments. Karen dared not hope, and yet she couldn't help but wonder whether this chakra power of hers, the only thing that she was good for, would Naruto find it useful as well? Hinata looked down at her map, and then up at the narrow cave opening. She wouldn't have even noticed it if Naruto had not pointed it out to her. "This cave isn't on the map," she said hesitantly. "It says that if we go around the base of the mountain, we'll eventually find a hidden stairwell." Naruto shook his head. "That'll add another half day to the journey. I've been here before, this is the fastest way through." "Okay, but just to confirm." Concentrating her chakra to her eyes, Hinata activated her Genkai, Byakugan. The secrets of her surroundings were unveiled to her, and she realized that he was right. The cave quickly widened out to a large man-made tunnel that traversed the mountain and emerged near their destination. As they made their way through the dark tunnel, Hinata deactivated her eyes and instantly lost all visibility. However, the way was straightforward enough, and there were no other nearby chakra signatures. Even if there had been, she doubted she would have noticed, what with Naruto's strange chakra following her. Her Byakugan allowed her to trace the chakra circulatory system of any individual within her range. Everyone, even civilians, had such a system. The main difference came from whether they were able to control their chakra flow and their innate chakra reserves. But it looked as though Naruto had two sources of chakra. In a flash, it struck Hinata, did it have something to do with the reason why everyone thought he was a monster? Suddenly, she realized she could see the vague outline of the walls around them. The tunnel was growing lighter. They were still only halfway through, so it couldn't be sunny. They soon emerged into a small cavern filled with a glowing pale light. Hinata walked over to the walls and, to her amazement, realized they were covered in some kind of spongy moss that emitted the light. Hinata turned back to report her findings to Naruto, but saw that he was already looking up at the luminous ceiling with a strange expression on his face. If she had to put it in a word, it was wistful, and it was the most emotion she'd seen from him since they'd left the village. What was he thinking about? "I'm sorry I doubted you," she said at last. Without looking at her, Naruto replied, "You should always confirm things with your own eyes. Even more so for someone like you. But sometimes, even my Byakugan doesn't tell me the entire truth," Hinata said softly. Naruto lowered his gaze, and she saw that his face was blank again. "Let's keep moving." The roar of a summoned beast echoed through the forest, followed shortly by the deep rumbling of the ground splitting apart. Soon afterwards, the sound of 1,000 chirping birds swelled out from the trees, accompanied by sparks of lightning. From Kakashi's vantage point, he could get a general gist of the ongoing battle, and given the battering he'd undergone at the hands of his former student, he was rather glad he was all the way up here in the tree, instead of down on the forest floor. Furthermore, with training his team, he didn't feel like he was simply twiddling his thumbs, waiting for the inevitable attack on their village. The group of missing Nin, calling themselves Akatsuki, the Jinchuriki, and the presence of their allied villages in the Chunin exams, even though they knew there was something tying all of these together, it seemed they could do nothing until their mysterious enemy first made a move. The tense shroud that enveloped the Hidden Leaf these days was not unlike what had covered the village 15 years ago, when the Ninetales had attacked. While Kakashi had been too young to be allowed in the village's main line of defense, this time around, he was more than prepared to put his life down on the line. He'd be damned if he lost anyone else without a fight. They hadn't been fast enough. Or perhaps, it had been a hopeless mission from the start. They'd found the Leaf agent they had been sent out to rescue lying on the floor of the designated safe house in a puddle of congealed blood. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly up at the ceiling. A leg and an arm had been amputated, both in a single, powerful blow, by the looks of the cleanly sliced flesh. The nearest window had a missing curtain, allowing a stray ray of sunlight into the otherwise darkened room. It seemed the dying ninja had used it in an attempt at a tourniquet. Naruto watched as Hinata knelt by the body and checked for a pulse. However, it was a futile endeavor, and after a moment, she looked up at Naruto and shook her head. "He's been dead at least half a day. It looks like he lost too much blood and went into shock." There was something missing here. The Hokage would not have spared a medic Nin and a Jonin on a feudal mission. The perpetrator wasn't able to finish him off. If he had time to try and patch himself up, he should have had time to leave a message. Naruto searched for the corpse, however, nothing turned up. The only thing that seemed to be there was a cold, stiffening body. To his surprise, Hinata spoke up. "Allow me, if you will." The muscles around her pale eyes grew pronounced as she activated her Byakugan. She scanned the corpse, before coming to a sudden stop at his stomach. "There's something there, a message. He must have swallowed it. His stomach acids have already started to digest it, but let me see." She paused. "Akatsuki is making a Wiapanto control the world. Believe Shinchuriki's their last target." Her ominous words rang in the resultant silence. "A weapon?" Naruto looked down at the corpses. Still faced the ninja who had died for this one message. There was an old scar running down the side of his face. Naruto couldn't remember seeing anyone with his features at the village. But then again, he never paid too much attention to others outside his immediate circle of acquaintances. Reaching over, Naruto closed the man's eyes shut. "We have to inform the Lord Third as soon as possible," said Hinata. Getting up, Naruto nodded. That much was obvious. The question was, would they make it back in time? At a hard pace traveling, they had reached their location after 3 days. But now, the sun was already setting on the day, and the third exam would be starting early in the morning. Should he send a clone back? No, while shadow clones were harder than your average clone, they were still vulnerable to too many attacks for them to serve us offensively against any opponent worth their salt. Then, should he leave behind the medic Nin and speed back to the hidden leaf on his own? Not only would he be abandoning his duty of escorting her, it would drain him to cover that much distance using his lightning chakra. But if he summoned Amikuro? Suddenly, Naruto's head spun as a deluge of memories rushed into his mind. One of his shadow clones had been taken out. More specifically, the one he transformed into a coin and left with the weasel-faced crook. He planned on letting it linger there as a safety measure and as a potential spying mechanism. But now, it seemed, the man he'd left it with was dead. "Give you money?" said an unknown male voice. It was dark in the pocket, but the clone could still hear everything happening around him. The male voice spoke politely, and yet something about it told him its owner was not someone to be trifled with. Unfortunately, the weasel blocking the bridge must have had a rather successful day taking advantage of passing travelers, and let it get to his head. "That's right. And if you don't pay up, I'll have the police go after you." "Today's not your lucky day," said the voice. "If I wasn't alone, you might have lived." "What are you talking about, you shark-faced bastard?" Abruptly, the memory stopped there. Presumably, a single blow had taken out his clone as well. Naruto blinked again. No matter how many times it happened, it always managed to disorient him. "Naruto," said Hinata. "Right now, I'm just dead weight. But I can take care of myself. Please go back ahead of me, and inform the Hokage of our discovery." Naruto stopped. Her too, he thought. What gave her the strength to be left behind? What had given the undercover agent the loyalty to die for this one message? What inspired Jiraiya to write books? What pushed Kakashi to train his students? They must have all had their own reasons, an answer to something that they valued above their own lives, an answer that drove them. The question was, what did Naruto have driving him? Was it the desire to be respected by the villagers? He had forsaken that dream ages ago. To gain the strength to protect those he cared about? He had already failed. To avenge the deaths of his teammates? There was nothing left to gain from their vengeance. To cling to life to survive? No, he realized. He had nothing. There was nothing at all. During the past several days they had spent together, Hinata had not shared with Naruto her life story. He couldn't possibly know that her father had disinherited her years ago for failing to hurt her younger sister, or that she had ranked rock bottom at the Chunin exams and become a laughingstock in her clan. Naruto didn't know that for someone like her, who had been drowning in a world of senseless violence, medical ninjutsu had become her lifeline. He couldn't have known. He was a prodigy, after all. A natural in ninjutsu, and the art of assassination. But she knew that he must have had more than his fair share of troubles. and what she had sensed in their short time together was that he was not quite the monster others had made him out to be. No, said Naruto. He held out a hand towards her, and suddenly, to her shock, lightning chakra began flickering around his form. I won't leave you behind. Chapter 37 Burial. This feeling, what was this feeling, coursing through him? His thoughts, usually so sharp and focused, felt like they were in a jumble. One thought led to another, before falling short, and then scrambling to another, before repeating, like waves on a shore. When he opened his mouth, however, what somehow came out was, "No, I won't leave you behind." Lightning began to course seamlessly through Naruto's body, his hair standing on end. Hinata looked taken aback, her pale eyes widening with surprise. Are you sure? Don't worry. You won't be electrocuted. To prove his point, Naruto encased his hands in a top layer of wind chakra. No, it's not that. Won't I slow you down? We're surrounded by enemy ninja here. I can't leave you behind. Somehow, his mouth was moving automatically, forming the words he needed. If it makes you feel any better, you're a medic, Nin. If the village is in any danger, we'll need every medic we have. A beat passed, as Hinata considered it, and then she nodded. Her features tightening with purpose, she unfurled the scroll. In a flash of smoke, the undercover agent's corpse and its accompanying bodily fluids disappeared, leaving behind no evidence that anything had ever been there. She was an excellent ninja, Naruto thought. And loyal. She was willing to compromise her own safety in exchange for the village's protection. It was strange to think that he had once been like her. Naruto? Are you ready? Refocusing himself, Naruto summoned 2 shadow clones. He didn't need to give any commands. With a nod at their originator, they simultaneously formed a tiger seal with their hands before flickering away. Their job would be to gather natural energy for him. The journey back to the hidden leaf would be taxing, and he needed every resource he could get. Turning back to Hinata, Naruto extended his wind chakra to the rest of his arms and his chest. This is going to be a little uncomfortable, but hang on tight. In a forest cave not too far from the hidden leaf, a group of sound nin chittered in the darkness. By some stint of their village's ninjutsu, their voices traveled no further than the entrance to the cave, assuring that their relentless advance towards their goal remained undetected. Man, I'm itching for some action already. It won't be long now. Just a few more hours. Those leaf bastards won't know what hit them. Brave words, but Toby could smell the stink of fear coming off of them. While the hidden leaf was not as formidable as the hidden cloud, you couldn't expect to partake in an invasion against one of the great hidden villages and walk away. What are you snickering about? It seemed one of them had noticed Toby sitting alone in the corner. Snickering? What gave you that impression? With an unflattering yelp, Toby hunched over. I think that fish I had earlier was bad, my stomach hurts, blurg. Hurriedly, the others backed away and returned to their mutterings. Dropping back down to the ground, Toby leaned his masked face against his fist, and regarded the silhouettes spread out in the cave. It was very likely that not a single one of them would survive the coming battle. Fear not, he thought. Their sacrifices would not be meaningless. The sun had just broken across the horizon when they crossed into Fire Country. The increasingly familiar scenery around them passed in a blur as Naruto blitzed through the trees, pale lightning crackling in his wake. The journey so far hadn't been as draining as Naruto had feared. Hinata was lighter than she looked, feeling nearly weightless in his arms, or perhaps he was just that distracted. All of a sudden, without warning, a dark shadow tumbled down from the sky. Flailing limbs, the rustle of a cloak, it was the body of a dead man, and right as it passed Naruto, he saw its dark eyes, staring accusingly back at him. A jolt running down his spine, Naruto almost skidded to a stop, but he kept going. And then one by one, more appeared, ghostly figures in ragged cloaks, falling down from the sky around him like leaves in the wind. It was nonsensical, it wasn't real. However, while it almost felt like the times when Amakuro had played an illusionary trick on him, he knew that it wasn't a. No, it was a memory, distorted, drawn up from the recesses of his mind. He hadn't thought of them in a very long time. His first kills. It had happened on his first mission involving bodyguard duty. He and his team had been escorting a silk merchant's caravan to Yugakure when bandits had attacked. Naruto had ended up killing all of them, even the one that had begged for his life. At the time, he had thought that was the only way to carry out his mission. He had steeled his heart and committed himself to his cause. And yet, following that, when the missing Nin Haiden had attacked Yugakure, he had thrown himself in front of a civilian boy during the middle of the fight. Naruto hadn't been able to explain it at the time, other than feeling a need to save the boy. As they fell, the ghostly bandits looked at him, their necks gleaming red and their dark eyes searing into his back as he swiftly passed them. Was it the same impulsive need driving Naruto right now? Despite everything that had happened since then, the people he had encountered, the training and journeys he had undergone, had nothing about him changed at all? The throng of bodies milling about the stadium was a security detail's nightmare. As civilians and senior shinobi alike crowded through the gates, any attempt to herd the masses in an orderly fashion had long since dissipated. Rather, any effort to exert control would have been superfluous, for numerous members of the Leaf's elite were scattered throughout the audience, their presence revealed not so subtly by their painted masks. After the village's prolonged hiatus from acting as hosts for the Chunin exams, it was a blatant show of power, an audacious greeting to quash any possible thoughts of betrayal from their so-called allies. The participating nations' kage overlooked the stage from the lofty apex of the stands, their shadowy figures distinguished only by the color of their hats. After an outwardly pleasant exchange of small talk, the three had fallen silent. No doubt, the real discussions would have to wait until they were behind closed doors. The third exam was about to begin. In one of the tunnels connecting the stadium to the outside, two shinobi walked side by side in seemingly companionable conversation. The 8 on their persons signified their allegiance to the hidden rain. Their privacy was secured by the watchful presence of 2 others from their village. What? Ajisai couldn't believe her ears. The Jonin was still talking, but while his lips continued to move, Ajisai couldn't comprehend a single syllable. She couldn't have heard him correctly, and yet there was no other way to interpret his words. After the Chunin exams are over, Haku is to be given over to the hidden sound. The Jonin had already moved on to another topic, namely that of the next set of orders from the Lady Angel. It was unfathomable for Ajisai to even dream of interrupting, when she clung on to every mention of their savior, and yet this she could not let pass. Wait, I'm sorry, she broke in. What do you mean he's to be given over? The Jonin eyed her darkly, clearly irritated at being cut off. What are you even talking about? She stopped, her heart beginning to sink. Haku! What do you mean give him over to the hidden sound? What about that seal on him I mentioned in the report? Oh, him. Yes, we're aware of it. We've made a deal with the hidden sound to give him to them in exchange for their cooperation. The Jonin paused, taking in her expression. He's not even from our village, you know. This is coming from Tenshi-sama? Ajisai sputtered. The Jonin raised an eyebrow. Are you questioning her words? Ajisai shrunk back, her mind spinning at the thought of such blasphemy. Of course not. Never. I just. Be grateful you were even given the honor of being a part of this plan. Now, do you understand your next orders? Eyes. Yes, sir. Do not fail us. The lady's salvation is almost at hand. And with that last warning, the Jonin left, disappearing with the other 2 Aimnin. Her heart thudding in her chest, Ajisai looked out at the audience still streaming into the stadium. Somewhere below the stadium, she knew that Haku was waiting for his upcoming fight. The seals shouldn't have been affecting him physically, and yet he had been barely able to get out of the hospital bed that morning. Oh, Swearin, Ajisai quietly called out her fallen teammate's name. How could she have let things turn out this way? As team leader, she had utterly failed. The sun climbed higher in the sky as they drew closer to the hidden leaf, and Naruto could feel the burn of chakra exhaustion inching upon him. Though the ghostly bandits had faded with the distance, as the sun's rays trickled down through the canopy, Naruto saw 3 new figures regarding him. They, too, were drawn from his memories, and they spoke words they had never said aloud to him. You actually thought I considered you one of my shinobi? Said the Hokage, his lined features twisting amusedly. You fool. I was simply using you. Jiraiya shook his head irritably. You're nothing at all like your father. Are you really his son? They should have given me my new team to start with, said Kakashi, looking away. Swallowing, Naruto picked up his speed, and with a crackling sound, burst through the jeering phantoms. As he did so, his whole body felt cold, and yet he could feel a bead of sweat trickle down his brow. This was no time for this, he thought to himself. The village was going to be attacked. He needed to regain control over himself. Suddenly, from the corner of his eye, he caught a flash of blue. Wings outstretched, a bird flitted by. The quarterfinals flew by in a series of increasing mismatches, as the foreign ninja overwhelmed their Leaf opponents with ease. Gradually, the riotous crowd predominantly made up of Leaf shinobi and civilians that had started the day quieted down to a disappointed buzz. The last quarterfinal bracket was a match between the female Suna Genin, Temari, and the Leaf's final chance at redemption, Yamanaka Ino. This is going to be unfortunate, Sakura thought to herself with no small amount of glee. True to expectation, it appeared Temari had been paying attention during the preliminaries. As soon as the match began, she kept her distance, remaining constantly in motion while distracting Ino with her wind. "Come on, cousin!" Menma shouted, cupping his hands around his mouth to magnify his already loud voice. "Beat that crusty sand bitch!" "Menma!" Sakura hissed, dragging his hands away. Shrugging her off, Menma scowled. "What's the big deal? Everyone else is doing it." "Would you jump off a cliff if everyone else was doing it?" "Well, it wouldn't be my first time," he stubbornly maintained. A loud groan sounded from the audience around them. The two returned their attention to the stage, only to see Ino's prone figure lying face down. Temari landed on the ground and folded up her giant fan. The proctor, Shikamaru, raised a hand. "The winner is Temari from the Hidden Sand." There were two shadows leaping beside Naruto. He knew he shouldn't have paid any attention to them, he should have gone straight past them. But despite himself, he turned to look at their faces, and at the familiar sight, he felt a lump rising in the back of his throat. "I always knew you were a monster," whispered the girl, fearfully. "You're not real," Naruto replied instantly, his heart thundering in his chest. "It's not fair," the boy spat, his scarred features twisting in disgust. "You don't care about anyone besides yourself. So why are you the one who survived?" "You're not really Naruto," said the girl, her voice growing louder. "The real Naruto disappeared a long time ago. You're just an empty vessel trying to pass as a human when really you're the Ninetales." "That's not true." "Naruto?" came a voice from below. "Are you okay?" At the sound, the two shadowy figures faded away, and Naruto shook his head in a daze. When he had stopped, he saw a pair of concerned, pale eyes gazing up at him. He wondered if she could feel his pounding heartbeat. "We're almost there," he said quietly. Footsteps echoed in the dark tunnel where Gaara had been waiting his turn. He opened his eyes and saw his sister's face, pale and drawn. "Remember, Gaara at the signal." Uncrossing his arms, he straightened up, and without a word, he brushed past his sister. As soon as Gaara had crossed into the open, sunlight struck his face, harsh and unforgiving, momentarily blinding him. Then, as the white spots faded from his vision, he found himself standing across from a girl with hair that burned like fire in the daylight. "Moving on to the semifinals will be Karen from the Hidden Grass versus Gaara from the Hidden Sand," cried the proctor. He fixed Gaara with a sharp look, before snapping his hand up into the air. "Begin!" The girl didn't waste any time, bursting into action with a quick series of hand seals that sent her plunging bodily into the ground. The audience began to murmur uneasily, no doubt waiting for Gaara to retaliate. He didn't move from his position, though he couldn't track her as well as he could have in the desert. There was no attack his sand couldn't protect him from. All he had to do was wait, and his prey would come to him on its own. Sure enough, before long, the ground at Gaara's feet suddenly exploded, a paper bomb planted below him, perhaps. It made no difference, as the sand that immediately rose up around him as a shield absorbed the heat of the sudden explosion. His arms still crossed across his chest, Gaara moved only the pupils of his eyes as he looked around for the girl. However, it seemed she had not revealed herself with the attack, choosing to bide her time underground. A wise decision, staying out of sight. He wasn't interested in fighting her. And if it had been anyone else besides him, perhaps it would have extended her life for just a few extra minutes. But time was of the essence, and it was running out both for her and for himself. Mother is growing restless. Gaara watched as his chakra-infused sand began to trickle back to his gourd. The smell of old blood wafted into his face, and his nostrils flared. From the corner of his eye, he caught a sudden burst of movement from the audience. And then a dark shadow unfolded itself over Gaara. Temari stood on the rim of the stadium, her giant fan raised into the sky and blocking the sun. It was the signal they'd agreed upon. Without hesitation, Gaara formed the ram's seal. Tanuki Nairi no Jutsu, feigning sleep technique. For the first time in a long while, the sweet and terrifying bliss of sleep descended forcefully upon him. He could feel Mother roaring in delight, rising out of him. His eyes fluttered shut, and his last fleeting thought was a question. When he awoke, if he awoke, would the world have come to an end? Deep underground, the moment Gaara fell asleep, Karen sensed the shift in chakra, though she hadn't yet realized its ramifications. For a split second, the overbearing feral and bloodthirsty chakra seemed to recede, and Karen sensed the chakra lying underneath. It was cold, it was furious. But it was also tiring and lonely, and in a way, it reminded her of Naruto's chakra. Then, it exploded. Pure, unadulterated hatred and wrath. Words couldn't describe the churning mammoth of chakra exploding above the ground. Immediately, Karen opened her eyes, but she could still feel the chakra. Her limbs went cold, and tears streamed down her cheeks. The sheer malevolence was so overwhelming, she found herself frozen, but the earth around her shook with a rumble, and Karen knew that if she didn't move, she would be buried alive. Give me strength, she prayed to the stars. Making a snake seal with her hands, Karen burrowed as far back as she could, molding apart the earth with her chakra, before shooting above ground. When she emerged, she found herself just outside of the stadium, and what met her was chaos. The first thing she noticed was the giant monster with seal markings all over its body crouched inside the stadium. It had a horrifically jagged maw, and there was a strange roaring sound coming from it, and Karen realized, her stomach flip-flopping, that it was laughing. It had a single tail which came crashing down with an explosive sound, tearing through half of the entire stadium. A cloud of thick dust swept through the air, and giant slabs of shattered rock crashed into the ground. With that single sound, the world became unmuted, and Karen realized people were screaming. The civilians who had survived were struggling to escape the stadium, but there were ninjas, foreign ninjas, suddenly descending upon the chaos, and they slaughtered anyone in their paths. The Leafnin, after an initial scramble to overcome their shock, seemed to have rallied together. They must have somehow been prepared for the possibility of such an onslaught. As Karen watched, several massed ANBU ripped through a mixed gang of Suna and Aim-nin, body parts and blood splattering the broken concrete. Karen! To her horror, a bloody figure was dragging himself to her. His stomach had been cut open, and he was struggling to contain his slippery guts from spilling out. While it was difficult to make out his features through the blood and dirt coating his face, the body could only belong to one person, Barami, her teammate. Karen! Your arm! He howled, tears and mucus streaming down his face. Heal me! Desperately, he reached out for her. Automatically, Karen started to offer her arm, and then she stopped. Why? Why did she need to heal him, when Zosie wasn't here? When nobody was watching her? When she hated him? She took a step back, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst in her chest. No, Karen said, relishing the taste of the word in her mouth. The freed one-tailed beast roared, an enemy ninja rained down from the sky, landing in their village. The ground shook with every step the beast took, and a wall of purple flames flickered on the rooftop, isolating the Hokage and Kazekage. Before Jiraiya could cry out a warning, one of the ANBU threw themselves at the wall, and let out a scream as they immediately burst into flames. It was a near impenetrable barrier, erected into place by 4 sound shinobi. And that could only mean one thing, visible through the wall of flames. Before the Kazekage even dug his fingers into his face to rip it away, Jiraiya already knew. Orochimaru, he said soberly, looking into the waxen face of his old teammate. After all these years, it seemed he had finally returned to the Hidden Leaf, to kill their teacher and destroy the village as he had once promised. Jiraiya had known this day would come, and still, he felt his heart ache. It was his fault he had let it come to this. He hadn't been able to bring himself to hunt Orochimaru down and kill him, as he should have. Raising his hands, he prepared himself to break through the barrier, even if it cost him his life when suddenly, a hulking figure landed with a crash beside him. It was the bodyguard that had been accompanying the fake Kazekage. Before Jiraiya's eyes, he burst apart in an array of flying limbs, and he realized it had been a puppet. There was someone else hidden within, controlling its every movement. He was dark and hunched over, and wore the black robes of what Jiraiya now immediately recognized as a sign of his affiliation with the criminal organization Akatsuki. "Your opponent is me," growled the man. Plumes of smoke rose in the distance, clouding the sky. There could only be one explanation, and it was what the Hokage had foreseen and yet failed to prevent: an attack on the hidden leaf. "There are enemies straight ahead," said Hinata, veins bulging around her Byakugan. "Naruto let me down." "I'll take care of this," he replied. "You head on to the village." With a nod, Hinata leaped down from his arms, disappearing through the canopy into the forest. The enemies weren't far ahead, and didn't bother trying to hide their presence. Soon, 3 unfamiliar ninjas blocked Naruto's path, 2 men, 1 woman. Sound Nin, by the looks of their attire and ate. "We were told to be on the lookout for you," said one of the men, a tall, smirking ninja with spiky black hair. The second, a female with long hair, added, "You'll have to get past us if you want to enter the village." Despite the chaos that must have been waiting for him ahead, Naruto felt oddly distant. Everything that could have gone wrong was going wrong, but he felt cold and unreachable. The 2 ninja advanced upon him, their confidence in their own abilities bolstered by their superior numbers. Naruto felt his eyes glazing over. Running wind chakra down his tanto, he dropped his body low to the ground and disappeared. When he reappeared behind them, the pair collapsed in 2 identical spurts of blood. Since the day he was first killed, Naruto had taken many lives without a second thought. He told himself it was because it was easier that way, that it was the only way to live as a ninja. But now, his head was filled with thoughts about what he had just done, and he knew, these 2 who he had just slain, they must have had missions of their own, team members they wanted to protect, ambitions they'd longed to achieve. He had taken all that away in a single instant, and the more he thought about it, the more Naruto realized that he felt absolutely nothing. He really only cared about himself. Everything he had ever done had been for himself. He had only wanted to be acknowledged by his village so that they would look at him. He had only wanted to protect his teammates so that he wouldn't be alone. They had all been right about him. The third member of the cell, a man with a bandaged face, looked stunned. He must have realized that there was nothing he could do, for he was frozen. His gaze inched up until they met Naruto's, and in a flash, the man fled. Maybe even just a few hours ago, Naruto would have finished the job. Now, however, he didn't bother to pursue him. Instead, he directed his gaze back to the village. An inhuman roar came from beyond its walls, and he knew that the tailed beast within the hidden sands Jinchuriki must have been released. How many villages had linked hands to launch this siege against the hidden leaf? An attack on this scale was unprecedented. Despite all their intel and preparations for an attack, how many casualties must there already be? Would there still be a village left standing after all this? Did it matter? We endure. Naruto had spent the last few years trying to figure out the meaning of these words, and somewhere along the way, he may have come to terms with it. But he realized now, it wasn't that he had nothing to endure for. It was that he had no reason to endure. There was a hole inside of Naruto. He had tried to fill himself up with his training, his missions, even the people he'd cared about, but no matter what he put in, he knew he would never be able to fill it up. His whole body had become ice cold. He raised a foot to step forward and then, he lowered it back down. Why was he rushing to return to the village? What did the hidden leaf's fate mean to him? Another distant roar echoed from beyond the village gates. Black smoke filled the sky, a pyre's smoke preceding a burial. Slowly, the sound of his heartbeats slowing in his ears, Naruto began to turn away. And then, in that instant, he felt the familiar sensation of memories flooding his mind, the memories of the clone he had left behind in the village before he'd set out on his escort mission. The door to his apartment opened with a creak, revealing a masked ninja. "HM? Naruto?" Kakashi seemed surprised to see him. Why are you still here? Weren't you sent out on a mission? A pause. Oh, you're a clone, aren't you? You'd think you'd have learned by now, said Naruto's clone. What are you sneaking into my apartment for again? With a flourish, Kakashi pulled a book out from his breast pocket. I'm just here to return this. I'm done with the reading. Has Jiraiya-sama told you when the next one will be coming out? Why don't you ask the man yourself? Muttering something about not wanting to interrupt such a busy and important person, Kakashi thrust the book into Naruto's hands. Before he left, he asked, assuming Naruto doesn't come back in time, will you be coming to watch the third exam? Yes, I'll be in the audience. All right. I'll see you then. I've got a training session too. Kakashi's voice faded away, replaced by another memory that followed a well-trodden path past the training ground. A lone figure stood in front of the memorial stone, his face awash with the light from the setting sun. To the clone's surprise, it was Menma, dressed in civilian clothes. He held a white carnation in his hand, and kneeling, he carefully laid it to rest in front of the stone. So you're the one who's been leaving these, said Naruto's clone. Menma jumped at the sound of his voice, and his face coloring, he nodded. My aunt runs a flower shop, so it's no trouble for me. He paused. I heard about your promotion to Jonin. Congratulations, you deserve it. In a splash of color, Menma's uncharacteristically embarrassed face faded into black, and then Naruto found himself in a stadium full of chattering people. Ignoring the looks from the others in the audience, Naruto's clone seated himself on a bleacher. He would have been content to have been left alone, but soon, a large shadow fell over him. He looked up to see a tired-looking Jiraiya heave himself into the seat beside him. Where have you been? The clone asked. I've been keeping busy, Jiraiya grunted, clearly not in the mood to talk. What about you? You're a clone, right? Where's Naruto? On a mission. Jiraiya seemed surprised. I'd thought Sarutobi-sensei was going to put that off until after the exams. Well, let's enjoy the show, shall we? His surroundings froze, and in a jarring shift, Jiraiya disappeared, and the stadium was in shambles. Screams. Chaos. It was pandemonium, and for a moment, Naruto's clone dumbly watched the tailed beast roaring into the sky. Was that how monstrous he had appeared when he lost control over the Nine Tails? Protect the lords! Shouted an ANBU commander. His agents, who had burst into action from their scattered posts, leaped to his bidding. In a flash, Kakashi appeared in front of him. Sakura, Menma! Get the civilians away from here. Sasuke and Naruto with me. If we want to stop that tailed beast, our best bet is going to be to wake up that Jinchuriki. Sound Nin had appeared over the village walls, and were now flooding into the arena. Nearby, an Aim Nin was exchanging blows with a Leaf Nin, and a Sunin Nin charged towards Naruto's clone. Sidestepping the enemy ninja, Naruto's clone killed him with a slash of his tanto, before returning his attention to the unfolding battles around him. The hidden villages of the sound, the rain, and the sand, they were all betraying the hidden leaf? What about the grass and rock villages? Kakashi-sensei started the clone. He stopped. A kunai gleamed in front of Kakashi's neck. The Jonin's eyes widened in shock. There was a ninja behind him, wearing a swirling orange mask. Where had he come from? I'll be taking this back, said the masked ninja, pulling up Kakashi's hitate, and then in a single motion, he ripped the Jonin's left eye out. Kakashi let out an anguished cry as blood streamed down the side of his face. Shoving the Jonin away, the masked ninja turned towards Naruto's clone. No, is this the Jinchuriki, or is this one of those infamous shadow clones? He raised another kunai. Only one way to find out. The tailed beast roared, thrashing its tail and shattering another section of the stadium. Down on the shaking ground, his face contorted in pain, Kakashi gritted out, Narutorin. Naruto's clone raised his tanto to defend himself, but in the blink of an eye, the masked ninja disappeared, and before he could react, he could feel the cold certainty of steel bite into his neck. Naruto opened his eyes. For a moment he didn't move. He stood stock still, breathing. Inhale. Exhale. You're empty, remember? He reminded himself. Lightning sparked. Blood was rushing to his head, his face felt hot. Naruto felt the earth below him crack as his heels dug into the ground. And then, he was moving. Faster than he had ever moved before, he raced towards the smoking village. The jumble of confused thoughts had all faded away. Naruto moved now at the bidding of a single thought, a single purpose. Kakashi-sensei. Chapter 38, The Burning Leaf. Panting, a woman with long blonde hair raced through the dark tunnels below the hidden cloud village. The water running through the tunnels was murky and stank of sewage. It was not a place she would have liked to venture into, but her current circumstances had given her little choice in the matter. Her name was Niujuto, and she was one of the hidden clouds to Jinchuriki. Above ground, an explosion rocked the surface. Her face paling, Yujuto nevertheless pressed onwards, eyes strained for the slightest movement in the dim light. And there, ever so slightly, something had just moved. Steeling herself, she dropped to all fours. Show yourself. Plip. A droplet of water dripped from the ceiling to the wet floors. A gray-skinned man wielding a bandaged sword revealed himself, stepping out from the shadows. I must say, you are quite the slippery one, Two Tails. I was just about to flood the entirety of your village to find you. Eyes narrowing, Yujuto took in his appearance. His face alone was distinctive, with markings like a shark, but the cloak was an immediate giveaway as to his identity. The Raikage had warned her that they would be coming for her eventually. She knew he was not an opponent to take lightly. You cannot defeat me! Her voice ended in a roar, bright blue flames erupting along Yujuto's form in the shape of a feline beast. While it was a sight that would have shaken the heart of any ordinary man, he was anything but. Reaching up to grip the hilt of his sword, the man grinned, revealing a mouthful of sharp teeth. You aren't the first to tell me that. Nor, I suspect, will you be the last. Another distant explosion sounded. Dust fell from the ceiling. The man's sword began to quiver in excitement, and he gave it a quizzical look. Footsteps sounded in the dark, and a dark-skinned man wearing sunglasses emerged. You say some arrogant things, Sharkface, but I'll soon be putting you in your place. The man frowned. You must be the Eight Tails I had hoped you would be kept busy while I took care of this matter. The yellow pupils of Yujuto's beast form veered in alarm towards the newcomer. Killer Bee, what about the village and Raikage-sama? Brothers got it covered and told me to find you. We'll take this one down together, and get the other one too, yeah? After a moment's hesitation, Yujuto smiled jaggedly. If we both survive this, I'll have to treat you to dinner. One moment, Naruto was in the forest surrounding the village. The next, he was beyond its walls, racing between familiar rooftops. The battle that his clone had witnessed in the stadium had spilled out, extending towards the civilian sectors of the village. Bodies, both local and foreign, were scattered out on the streets, engaged in ongoing skirmishes. To them, it must have been a battle to the death. To Naruto, however, the entire world was moving in slow motion. While he must have used his lightning chakra to speed up his nervous system countless times, this time, something was different. Whereas Naruto had always focused his chakra inside his own body, the immense amount of chakra he just processed had spilled out of its container, surging into his surroundings. Now, it was as though the world had become an extension of himself. He could sense every single body within his visible perimeter, and track every slightest movement. It was not unlike what he experienced in his imperfect sage mode, but instead of sensing natural energy, he was sensing the electrical impulses in every living thing. A giant sand-colored beast rose out from the stadium, the One-Tail. Naruto knew its Jinchuriki, Gaara, had to be somewhere inside it, allowing the beast to run berserk. However, that was something he would have to deal with later. Though only a few seconds had passed since Naruto's clone had dispersed, anything could have happened. Kakashi-sensei. Ever since Naruto had graduated from the academy and joined his team, the Jonin had been his teacher and ally. Naruto's kenjutsu, his lightning chakra, they were both things that Kakashi had taught him. Despite all this, or perhaps because of it, it seemed that somewhere along the way, he had come to think of Kakashi as someone who would always be around to eat ramen with him. Now, it was painfully apparent that that wasn't the case. Naruto had traveled the world in search of answers, and came out of it empty-handed. But maybe, he thought, He'd been overthinking the whole thing. Maybe it was something much simpler. Dark blood poured out of a hole in Kakashi's face. The Jonin's face twisted in agony and he staggered once, twice before dropping to the ground. "Kakashi-sensei!" cried Sakura, leaping forward. Frozen, Sasuke's eyes fixed on the spot where the masked ninja had been standing. All he could think about was how he hadn't been able to follow his movements at all. All of his training until now, what had been the point? He was as helpless as he had been on that night. "So it was a clone, as I suspected," said the masked man's amused voice. "Well, no matter, he'll be here soon enough." From beside Sasuke, Menma brought his hands together. "Ninpo, Shinranshin no, mind destruction technique." To Sasuke's surprise, the masked man stiffened, and he realized to his astonishment that his teammates had worked. Menma turned to him, his expression irate. "What are you doing, Sasuke? Get him!" "Shit!" Sasuke pushed himself to action, drawing a pair of kunai from his holster and shooting towards the masked ninja. But it was too late. Menma's face contorted. "I can't," he broke off as the masked man abruptly moved, freed from the effects of the. Without slowing, Sasuke twisted his body to match the masked man's trajectory, and plunged his kunai towards him. They sunk into his chest and then kept going, as though moving through empty air. "That won't do," said the masked man. A shrill sound rang in the air behind Sasuke. His Sharingan activated, and in the same instant, he ducked just in time to see another kunai slice through the air. Only it hadn't been meant for him. Sasuke's gaze veered to his teammate. Menma's eyes were widening, his lips parting. Sasuke opened his mouth to shout, but there was no point. It was too late. Clang! A brilliant shade of red flashed. A split instant later, something low crackled. Suddenly, there was someone standing there, his tanto drawn to counter the kunai. It was Naruto. His face was blank, as per usual, but Sasuke had never seen Naruto like this before. His form awash in a surge of lightning chakra. His eyes blazed with a foreign emotion, and Sasuke found himself flashing back to their conversation the previous week. "What you found out there, was it worth it, leaving behind everything?" "Can you stand up, sensei?" asked Naruto, in a deceivingly calm tone. "I'm fine, it's just a scratch," Kakashi gritted out, grimacing as Sakura tore off part of her apron skirt and wrapped it around his face. The masked man drew back his kunai and flipped back, putting distance between himself and Naruto. "It's good of you to join us, Naruto. I've been wanting to meet you for quite a long time." While it was impossible to tell what the masked man was thinking, if Sasuke had to venture a guess, he would have described him as gleeful. Naruto didn't respond. He disappeared somehow. He was moving at a speed faster than even his Sharingan could track, and when he reappeared, his tanto pierced the spot the masked man stood. But just like with Sasuke, the blade cut through with zero resistance, as though swinging through empty air. Was it a? No, it wasn't a trick. Naruto's tanto had gone straight through the masked man because the man wasn't there. And yet, at the same time, he was. For the second time in about as many seconds, Sasuke was reminded of just how little he knew, and something deep in his chest seethed. "You three help the others stave off the tailed beast," said Naruto, seemingly unfazed. "I'll handle this one." The situation was grim. A tailed beast was on the loose in the middle of the village, and numerous enemy ninja were engaged in battle with Leaf Nin. But still, I made it in time. Naruto's speed had not failed him. Kakashi was still alive, and Team Kakashi remained intact. Unfortunately, the glow of relief was short-lived, as Naruto took in the sight of the masked ninja in front of him. Though his face was covered by a swirling orange mask, his black and red robes could mean only one thing. Akatsuki. The Hokage had been right about their presence. They were the organization that had given them so much trouble in Wave Country a few years back. They were the ones who were hunting down Jinchuriki, and by extension, Naruto himself, and they had been the ones to kill his teammates. Now, they have almost killed Kakashi. The heat in his face dissipating, Naruto drew his tanto from its sheath. It was not out of anger or a desire for vengeance. The chaos of emotions had settled down, the storm subsiding somewhere along the way. The world had ceased to move around Naruto, and he drew his blade because he understood with stark clarity that if he wanted to save Kakashi, if he, himself, wanted to live, the shinobi before him needed to die. But something was strange about the man. Over the years, Naruto has encountered many powerful shinobi. He had traded blows with other members of the Akatsuki, who were all at minimum S rank missing nin. He had studied under Kakashi of the Sharingan, stood in the shadow of the god of shinobi, and traveled the world with the Sannin, the Toad Sage. Naruto knew how it felt to stand in front of a ninja so overwhelmingly powerful. He could only hope to outrun them. Naruto felt none of that from the masked man in front of him. In fact, he felt very little, if anything, from him at all. He was a man with a presence so faint, if he hadn't been holding Kakashi's bloody eyeball in one hand, Naruto wouldn't have spared him a second glance. And yet Naruto couldn't kill him. His lightning chakra surged through him as he swung his tanto at top speed, but no matter how often his blade appeared to pierce the man, Naruto could sense him constantly disappearing and appearing. While it must have been some type of powerful warping ninjutsu, Naruto had never seen anything like it. And as the masked man continued to evade his blade, Naruto could feel the adrenaline rush starting to wear off. The burn of chakra exhaustion was creeping up on his limbs. Time was running out. "A man of few words, I see," said the masked man, as Naruto's tanto drove straight through his head. "But I only want to talk with you." "So you got that eye from Kakashi-sensei by talking to him, did you?" Sakura snapped from behind Naruto. It was curious how the masked man had yet to go on the offensive. Though Naruto's onslaught left little room for a counterattack, given the masked man's flippant tone, he did not seem like someone on the verge of being overpowered. He shouldn't have been able to, but it was starting to seem that if the man so wished, he could turn the tables on Naruto. And ye didn't. Finally, Naruto lowered his tanto. "What do you want?" The masked man landed nimbly on his feet. "He speaks. Now let me ask you." His voice cut off as the tailed beast let out a furious roar, stamping its clawed feet and sending tremors through the ground. Shouts rang out, and Naruto could sense multiple bodies diving out of the way. Kakashi rose to his feet, his face pale from blood loss. "Naruto. I saw Gaara put himself to sleep using ninjutsu right before that tailed beast appeared. We need to stop it before it destroys the rest of the village." "But why is that any of your concern?" The masked man spread out his arms. "Does the fate of the hidden leaf have anything to do with you?" Naruto's eyes narrowed. "Why wouldn't it have anything to do with me? I know how the villagers treat their Jinchuriki. At every step of the way, the village has isolated you. Taken advantage of you. In a sense, you're a lot like me." Another explosion sounded in the distance, this time away from the beast. "Except you're not a Jinchuriki." Naruto would have been able to sense if he was. Inclining his head, the masked man replied, "You're right, I'm not a Jinchuriki. But I do know one thing, that hole inside of you, nothing in this world will ever fill it." Naruto stopped. His breath slowed, and for an instant, he thought he could see ghostly figures falling from the sky. "Who are you?" The masked man looked up at the tailed beast and then back down at Naruto. Something glinted in the mask's lone hole. "Someone who's going to change this world." To Tobi, it was almost disconcerting how closely the boy resembled the fourth Hokage. He had known for years that except for his coloring, which took after his mother, Naruto's father had strongly influenced him. Now that they were finally face to face, however, he could appreciate for himself the fourth Hokage's last legacy. Appearance-wise, they could have been doppelgangers, and though Naruto did not appear to have been formally taught Fuinjutsu in any appreciable form, he seemed to rely heavily on his speed for his offensive, a tactic that echoed the fourth Hokage's own battle strategy. Still, there were notable differences. The fourth Hokage had been beloved from his childhood, a rising star by his teenage years, and a hero by the time of his death. In Tobi's own youth, the fourth had been a walking legend. There had always been a sense of purpose and self-assuredness to his movements, and during his short reign as Hokage, he had been every bit the leader the village had needed. Naruto, on the other hand, had none of that. He had grown up unloved, with no friends or family to call his allies. Just from a single glance, Tobi could tell, his facial expressions, his stance, everything about Naruto was guarded. It reminded Tobi strongly of his old self, and it told him that all the painstaking steps he had taken until now to ensure Naruto arrived at this point had been worth it. All of a sudden, Something in his periphery hissed. Toby felt a familiar distorted flickering in his consciousness. The attack on the hidden cloud has begun, a voice spoke telepathically. Naruto was still staring at him, the blank expression on his face shifting to one of slight unease. The words Toby had shared appeared to have struck some sort of chord within him, just as he'd expected. Unfortunately, though he would have liked to stay longer to talk more and see the invasion to the finish, his abilities were needed elsewhere. Toby extended his hand to the boy. Think about it. Think about it. Holding up a hand in an ironic farewell, the man's body began to gradually disappear, as though wiping himself from existence. Naruto leaped forward, reaching out for Kakashi's eye, and this time, his fingers brushed against something solid when the man disappeared. Staring at his empty hand, after a moment, Naruto balled it into a tight fist. Someone who's going to change this world? What did that mean? A hand clamped down on his shoulder. Kakashi looked at him, his brow creased. Don't let his words distract you, Naruto. Right now, what's important is that we stop Gaara. After a pause, Naruto nodded. With Kakashi safe, the reality of the situation developing in the Hidden Leaf was starting to feel more tangible. And when Akatsuki was the group responsible, Naruto couldn't say that it had nothing to do with him, all the more so, with Kakashi asking for his help. The One-Tail let out another deafening roar, drawing Naruto's attention. Though it was too far out of his newfound range to sense, it would be a simple matter to retrieve Gary, except his chakra exhaustion had finally caught up to him. Even standing up was scraping the bottom of his barrel. His senses were rapidly dulling. The world was starting to move around him, the way it had used to. But he was not quite out of options yet. The two shadow clones he'd summoned before returning to the village they'd had all night under the moonlight to meditate. It was time to take advantage. Drawing back his shadow clone, which sat meditating in a clearing a long distance away, Naruto felt chakra flowing back into his body. At first, it was the chakra he had initially dispensed to create the clone, and then, like a dam breaking, he felt natural energy begin to pour into his body. It was pure, unadulterated energy. It did not distinguish between good or evil. It simply rewarded those with the patience to open themselves and accept everything it offered. The chakra filled him and molded him. Lightning crackled around Naruto before snapping into a low, controlled hum that shrouded him. Naruto felt his senses return, magnified to even greater heights than before. The balance of his own energy and natural energy was nearly perfect. The only thing still in his way was the Nine-Tails' interference, but the slight hitch was still enough to throw it out of balance. Naruto felt the energy start to lap and influence his body. As his hair rapidly grew and his fingers and toes sharpened into claws, a quick sweep of the battlefield told Naruto everything he needed to know. Gaara was buried in the sandy head of the One-Tail. Jiraiya was fighting a bizarre and monstrous chakra signature that seemed to be operating from inside a puppet. The Hokage was trapped inside a barrier and engaged in battle with an equally monstrous chakra signature. Most of the other Jonin were fighting off teams of enemy shinobi. Sasuke and his teammates were doing a surprisingly good job at keeping the One-Tail occupied while also fending off a squad of sand shinobi. Kakashi was on his way to join them, but when he was suddenly missing half his depth perception, Naruto doubted the Jonin would be able to do much. Naruto took a tentative step forward, and then began to move. The world moved in slow motion as he raced past Kakashi, past Sasuke's teammates running up the walls of the stadium. He leaped onto the One-Tail. Its yellow pupils grew bigger as he drew close, and then he was standing right above where he could sense the unconscious Gaara. Just as the One-Tail's pupils began to flicker towards Naruto, he ran wind chakra down his tanto and plunged the blade into its sandy head. It let out a roar that blasted his ears and threatened to blow him off, but ignoring it, he wedged the blade back to reveal a head of red hair. It was Gaara, slumbering in a ninjutsu-induced sleep, allowing the beast within to wreak havoc. It would have been simple enough to kill him. Naruto was confident a point-blank Rasengan combined with his speed would do the job. He thought his old self might have gone ahead and done it, heedless of questions, thinking only of what needed to be done. But now, Naruto found himself hesitating. Why? What was different from before, when he'd taken the lives of the Sound Nin with ease? And then it struck him. It was because Naruto had seen this scene before. He had seen it in himself back when he had been reeling from the deaths of his teammates, and gave himself over to the Nine Tails. At the time, Kakashi had called out to him and brought him out. Gaara, on the other hand, seemed to have no one to call his name. He was surrounded by enemies. But why? What circumstances had brought Gaara to this moment? What was the difference between them? Was it just that they had been born in different villages? If Naruto had been born the Jinchuriki of the One Tail, would that have been him, buried in the head of a sand monster? In a sensory a lot like me. Naruto looked down at the red-haired Jinchuriki below him, and wondered if there weren't others like him in the world. Drawing back his fist, Naruto punched Gaara. The water around her was endless. Yujuto couldn't breathe. Her lungs were on fire. Her head felt like it would explode. The Akatsuki intruder had fused with his sword to form a half-shark monster, and used the technique to trap them underwater. To say the cat-like Two-Tails sealed within her was not happy would be an understatement, and while Yujuto and the Two-Tails didn't get along on the best of days, they had never been as unified in intention as they were at that moment. We need to get out of here. As though privy to her thoughts, Killer Bee, surrounded by a shroud of his tailed beast chakra, swam past her. A short distance away, the monstrous shark-like intruder appeared to be hot on his heels. I'll distract him, signaled Killer Bee. Get out! Perhaps thanks to his tailed beast being half octopus, Killer Bee appeared to be handling the lack of oxygen much better than Yujuto. But still to leave would be to abandon Killer Bee in the fight against the intruder, and that she could not forgive. Even if her lungs were about to collapse in on itself. There is a time and place for upholding one's honor, and now isn't it? Yowled the Two-Tails. Her life was starting to flash before her eyes, though Yujuto hated to admit it. Two-Tails was right. She wouldn't be much help to Killer Bee if she drowned here. As the intruder chased after Killer Bee, who swam in the opposite direction, Yujuto could see the border of the water draw closer to her. With a last weak kick of her legs, she propelled herself forward and then, gasping, she broke out of the water prison. Landing hard on the stone floor, Yujuto coughed and took in quick, painful gulps of air. Drained as she was, her water-laden clothes weighed heavily upon her as she pushed herself up, but there was no time to waste. She needed to find reinforcements. Yujuto had lost track of time in the fight against the shark intruder, but surely the Raikage and the Clouds A and B would have taken care of the other intruders by now, the ones causing the explosions above ground. Out of everyone, the Raikage would know what to do. And no matter how powerful the intruder, together with Killer Bee, the pair would be unstoppable. Several sections of the sewers had collapsed in on themselves, and it was with great relief that Yujuto finally saw light peeking down through the exit path. Pushing herself to the limit, she sped up, bursting into the open. The sight that awaited her caused her heart to stop. It was not sunlight, but fire that lit the path. Flickering flames at her feet led to a blazing inferno sweeping through the hidden cloud. The stone structures that had supported their village were now mere chunks of rock, crumbling before her very eyes. The air was thick with smog, and Yujuto had to cover her nose and mouth as she made her way to the center of the village. As she drew closer, she caught sight of a giant white bird-like beast in the air. Each flap of its wings caused a ripple in the fire around it. And then there she could make it out. The dark, hulking figure of the Raikage standing on a platform. But he wasn't alone. There were two figures by him, dressed in the Akatsuki cloaks of black and red. And yet the Raikage wasn't attacking them. Instead, he was standing very still, while the two beside him conversed. Yujuto, who'd been about to jump to the Raikage's side, hesitated. What was going on? Why wasn't he attacking them? Yujuto. The voice calling her name came from a charred body lying on the ground that she'd assumed to be dead. The body lifted itself up, and Yujuto found herself looking into a familiar face with shaggy white hair. Her stomach plummeted and Yujuto dropped to her knees. Darui! She reached out for him, but he shook his head. Get out of here. What happened to the village? And Raikage-sama? They took us by surprise and bombed the village, then they got to the boss. Darui grimaced. Sorry, I couldn't protect. His voice trailed off. His eyes fluttered shut. Temari wasn't exactly sure what had happened. She and Baki had been struggling to hold their position against the Leaf Shinobi and protect the monster, when something red streaked by. A moment later, the monster let out the most awful, ear-splitting screech she had ever heard in her life. Then, the ground shook one last time and the monster imploded. Chunks of matted sand began to fall down from the sky. Abandoning her giant fan, Temari dove out of the way to avoid being buried alive. When she got back up, there was suddenly a ninja standing in their midst. He was a feral-looking leaf-nin, and he was carrying Gaara's limp body. Temari's eyes widened in horror. Was her brother dead? Gaara! Startled, the leaf-nin turned to her. In his arms, Gaara's body twitched, as though he'd somehow heard her voice, and Temari felt relief sweep over her. However, it was quickly replaced with another sense of dread as the leaf-nin held a kunai up to Gaara's neck. Call off your men, or I'll kill him. Lightning flashed in the dark clouds surrounding the hidden cloud, followed moments later by the sound of rumbling thunder. Droplets began to fall down from the sky, before turning into sheets of rain. The raging fire in the village had just started to dampen when a bedraggled figure emerged from the sewers, dragging a large body behind him. The body carved a trench in the scorched ground behind him, as the man made his way to the center of the village, where 3 others waited for him. Kisame, dropping his bloody load, took in the blank face of the hulking enemy figure standing in their midst. I see the plan was a success. Given what they say about the rakeage, I must admit I am surprised. The masked figure turned, and Kisame saw the blood red of the Sharingan gleam at him. The man had called himself Madara when they first met, and while Kisame wasn't sure whether he believed him, he knew that at the very least, his power to subjugate Kage under the control of his Sharingan was real. Unfortunately, that won't last much longer. He has one of the strongest wills I've ever encountered, said Madara. Well, he just about had to crack when his entire village was getting blown up, yeah, crowed the man feared as the Hidden Rocks bomber, Deidara. Raising an eyebrow, he then jabbed an accusing finger at the load on the ground. Is that the Jinchuriki? Weren't we supposed to leave them alive? Oh, he is very much alive, Kisame answered. I simply cut off his legs so he wouldn't be able to get away. And what of the 2 tails? Asked Madara. Kisame didn't mince his words. I chose to prioritize the 8 tails capture, and she escaped during the fight. Very well. Deidara, search for her from the skies. To think the day would come when I take orders from Tobi, Deidara sighed. Lightning flashed. Thunder rumbled. As the rakeage silently stood guard behind them, a droplet of rain landed on his face, sliding down his cheek. Many years had passed since Inoki had set foot inside the Hidden Leaf's walls, and the first impression he got was that the bastards were doing entirely too well for themselves. The constant stream of visitors in and out of the hidden village hidden in nothing but name was indicative of a rapidly growing economy. It was a far cry from the Hidden Rock, which was a natural stronghold with its mountainous terrain. Under Inoki's leadership, the village maintained a strict military focus. Visitors could only enter after rigorous screening, and their entire stay was monitored. The Hidden Leaf, on the other hand, seemed to allow anyone who could rub 2 ryo together. It was an utter disgrace, and Inoki had expected nothing less from the incumbent Hokage. Now, however, he had reason to suspect that the village was plotting to seize power. It was why Inoki had accepted the Leaf's offer to have his genin take part in their exams so he could investigate for himself. Over the past few years, various Jinchuriki have been quietly disappearing. Inoki's intelligence network hadn't been able to pinpoint exactly which, but it was an undeniable truth. As for where the blame lay, call him senile, but Inoki was no fool. He knew the mercenary organization called Akatsuki was behind it. As a previous client of the group, however, he had not expected them to lay a hand on his village. But just recently, the Hidden Rock had lost their 5 tails Jinchuriki. Han had been sent on a top-secret mission with 2 other operatives whose remains were discovered days after they'd been expected to return a double blow after the departure of the 4 tails Jinchuriki years before. If Akatsuki was so bold as to lay a hand on a Jinchuriki of his village, they must have a mighty ally and contractor. It had to be either the Raikage or the Hokage, and between the 2 of them, Inoki suspected the latter. However, it seemed that Inoki had been wrong. Great walls of purple fire roared around the distant figures of the Hokage and the Kazekage's impersonator. Shinobi affiliated with sand, rain, and sound were pouring into the village, and skirmishes were breaking out between them and the Leaf Nin. Lord Third, said Kitsuchi, his son and right-hand man. Our genin has been safely evacuated. It seems our suspicions about the leaf were misplaced, said Inoki gravely, watching a group of Aimnin overwhelm a young leaf chunin. Kitsuchi nodded. What shall be our next course of action? The hidden leaf was on fire. And in a time when their closest allies had all betrayed them, surely they would appreciate some help. But it would not come from Hidden Rock. It was none of their business, especially when they had never formally established an alliance. Inoki's primary concern was to return to his village and reinforce their defenses. This is not our battle. We will be withdrawing. Yes, sir. Inoki felt the weight of gravity lift from his shoulders, and then he was floating up into the air. As he rose higher and higher, until he was above its walls, the screams of battle grew more and more distant. A war was brewing. Inoki could smell the fumes of death approaching. And unlike the leaf, the hidden rock would be ready. Chapter 39 Blind Animal. Raindrops poured down from the dark sky, overflowing the beaten banks of the hundreds of rivers that winded through Rain Country. Its largest river fed into a lake that surrounded the hidden rain, a city full of swaying metal towers with inhabitants that stole whispered conversations under bamboo umbrellas. Farther out, away from the city, simpler people rested under thatched roofs, the grass muting the deafening roar of the constant rainfall. Beyond the last hut, the land plunged sharply in a cliff, and thick clouds swept over the edge, filling the floodplains below. It was there, beyond the towers, the huts, and the floodplains, that an immense cave rose out of seemingly nowhere. It lay in a fog so dense, only those who had lost their way could possibly stumble upon the cave. For several years now, the cave had been the hiding place of a gigantic wooden statue. The wood was rough and hewed and shaped in a humanoid form. Holding secrets long since forgotten over a millennia, it had 9 eyes, 3 of which stared unblinkingly out at the other occupants of the cave. A missing Nin bearing the slashed 8 of the hidden waterfall made his way to the center of the cave. On his shoulder, he carried the unconscious body of a large man in armor. Throwing it heavily down on the ground, he surveyed his surroundings with a keen gaze. Don't tell me I'm the first one back? Even after the long chase this one gave me? Kisame is currently on his way back with the 8 tails Jinchuriki, answered a woman's voice. Sitting alone and closest to the cave's entrance sat a young man with white hair. Baring his jagged teeth in a grin, he added, Seems like the 2 tails managed to get away, though. A mere setback. It is only a matter of time until we capture the rest, said a deep voice from farther back in the cave. Of his dark silhouette, only a pair of penetrating, ringed eyes could be seen. And now, with the addition of the 5 tails, we are another step closer to our goal. I see several new faces. Am I right to assume these are the new replacements? I've heard a lot about you, said the young man. The immortal bounty hunter, Kakuzue's source told me that you handed in the bounty of Raiga, one of the 7 swordsmen. You wouldn't happen to know the whereabouts of his sword, Kiba? Kakuzu's pupilless eyes traveled to meet the young man. Doesn't seem to ring a bell. I'm sure it doesn't. As the two regarded each other warily, shadows shifted in the recesses of the cave. Slowly, a figure separated from the darkness to reveal a slashed hidden Rain 8 and an expressionless face bearing multiple metal piercings. Let us begin the extraction process. No, said Karen, relishing the taste of the word in her mouth. It was a sight she'd always longed to see. Her teammate staggered before her, a jumble of sagging flesh and intestines. It was a horrible death, and Karen only wished it had been more drawn out. However, judging from all the blood he had lost, he should have already been dead. But as though carried by a wrathful spirit, Barami stumbled to his feet, face twisted in agony and hatred, and breathed at her, No? You useless bitch. I'm going to bite every inch of you until you're screaming, squirming, I am going to kill you. His words were empty, and yet Karen felt the smile fade from her face. You're already too far gone. You can't kill me. Barami spat out a glob of blood, and Karen flinched as specks splattered across her face. When Zosui finds out what you've done at the mention of the name, Karen involuntarily took a step back, and Barami grinned bloodily. He'll suck you dry just like your mom and you'll wish you were dead. He'll watch his eyes rolling back. He dropped to the ground. The sour stench of urine filled the air. Finally, her teammate was dead. But instead of feeling satisfaction, Karen found her eyes drawn to Barami's face. His lips were still reared back, frozen in a sick grin. She felt her stomach twist. And then she heaved, hot bile souring her throat. Naruto held the blade of his kunai to Gaara's neck. "Call off your men, or I'll kill him." The grains of sand that protected Gaara shivered in place, and Naruto felt the eyes of both Sand and Leaf Nin fixate upon him. It was a bluff, of course. There were too many questions he wanted to ask and too many things he wanted to know about Gaara. Judging from the way the faces of the Sand Nin blanched, however, it seemed they could grasp the ramifications of his threat. "We don't have the authority to do that," said a Sand Jonin. "We follow only the command of the Kazekage." Time was running out. Naruto was already on his second clone, and he could feel the last droplets of natural energy seeping out of his limbs. One final push of his senses, and he searched the battlefield for a chakra signature that could have belonged to the Kazekage, except there was none. "Either your Kazekage isn't here, or he's already dead," he said. "That's right," Kakashi said. He and his Chunin team had been the primary engagers in the fight against the Sand Nin. Someone was impersonating the Kazekage. I suspect it was the deed of the missing Nin known as Orochimaru. The Jonin's face hardened. "Impossible. Your lies won't shake us. Our allies have barricaded your Hokage with the Kazekage, and it is our lord who will emerge victorious." No, another Sand Nin began hesitantly. "They're not lying. I haven't been able to sense the Kazekage since we arrived at the village." The Sand Kunoichi, Temari, recoiled. "What? That's impossible. I saw Fath Kazekage sitting with the other Kage during the exam." "Orochimaru is infamous for his use of a technique that can steal faces," said Kakashi. "That may have been the case with the Kazekage." The Sand Jonin furiously turned on his subordinate, who shrank back. "Why didn't you say anything until now?" "The Kazekage's escort informed me it was part of the plan." "Since when?" The growing looks of confusion on the Sand Nin's faces told Naruto everything he needed to know about their involvement in the invasion on the Hidden Leaf, or perhaps, more accurately, their lack of involvement. It seemed they'd all been played like puppets in a much larger scheme that had taken advantage of the Hidden Sand's struggling circumstances. "Lower your weapons," said Naruto, "or the Jinchuriki dies." The Sand Nin collectively turned towards the Jonin, whose face twisted in a myriad of emotions: anger, confusion, doubt, weariness. Temari stepped forward, her jaw set. "Baki." The Jonin dropped his blade to the ground with a clatter. Following suit, the rest of the Sand Nin lowered their weapons. At the same time, Naruto felt his limbs returning to their original state, and as his strength left him, he lowered his Tanto blade from Gaara. The situation was worse than anything Hinata could have imagined. Metal screeched as weapon met weapon. Red-painted faces groaned on the ground. Black smoke marred a cloudless sky. "Medic!" shouted a voice. Snapping back to attention focus, "Hinata!" She hurried to the source, a female ANBU wearing a cat mask. She held an unconscious male Chunin in her arms, who appeared to be bleeding out. Though Hinata couldn't see ANBU's face, from the tone of her voice she must have been frantic. "I tried stabilizing him, but he's getting worse." As soon as she saw his injury, Hinata felt the panic disappear, leaving behind a sharp, focused calm. "Lay him flat on the ground," she commanded. "And if any enemy ninja approaches, protect us." With a swallow, the ANBU nodded. Hinata activated her Byakugan, and the injured man's body revealed itself to her. A deep gash stretched across his abdomen, a wound that, while serious if left untreated, was not immediately life-threatening. The man's body suddenly spasmed, before stiffening, and a bubble of frothy sputum formed at his lips. Hinata frowned, focusing on her survey. Judging from the symptoms, there had to be something else there. It was faint, but obvious now that she knew what she was looking for. Some kind of foreign agent was in his blood, shutting down his system. The moment it reached his heart, the man would go into cardiac arrest. All of a sudden, the female ANBU flung out a shuriken that embedded itself into the forehead of a ninja from the Hidden Rain, who dropped to the ground. In the same breath, she formed a tiger hand seal before blowing out a fireball at another rain assailant. Meanwhile, Hinata concentrated her chakra into her fingertips and pressed them around the areas she could see the foreign agent, blocking any further progression. Then, her hands glowing with the faint aura of medical ninjutsu. She guided the worst of it out of his system. Black liquid pooled out of his facial orifices, and the effect was immediate, as the man shuddered once, before relaxing. His eyes fluttered and then opened. "Hate!" cried the ANBU, jumping to his side. Suddenly, Hinata heard a moan. 50 feet away, the foreign ninja that the ANBU had defeated lay on the ground, their bodies scorched and still sizzling. The awful smell of singed meat filled the air. Half their face had melted away, but they were still alive, a sunken eyeball and a lidless socket turned towards Hinata. Her chest ached. Quickly joining their side, Hinata sheathed her hands in chakra. Placing them over the ninja's chest, she stopped their heart, and with one last sigh, the ninja fell silent. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple. Wiping it away, Hinata straightened up and surveyed the battlefield. Spotting another leaf mine splayed across the ground, she hurried towards them. There was much left for her to do, and while she couldn't get to everyone in time, she would do her best. Too much. It was all too much for Karen. Too many people were dying. One by one, chakra signatures all around her were being rapidly extinguished, like candle flames in a maelstrom. While on an unprecedented scale, it was not an unfamiliar sensation for Karen, who curled up into a tighter ball inside her dark hiding place. In a flash, she found herself transported back to her hut in grass country, dark night peeking through the cracks in her ceiling. She could hear an odd clattering sound, and for a moment, Karen wondered if Sosui had found her. She tensed, waiting for his iron grip to clench around her arm when she realized she was alone, and the sound was coming from her chattering teeth. No more, she thought. Something heavy crashed outside onto the wall of the shed, and she wondered if it was Burami, still howling for her. Perhaps his blood, still splattered across her face, had summoned him? No, she thought, squeezing her eyes shut. But despite her words, she could still feel hands grabbing her, pawing at her. Phantom teeth chomped on her arms, and she felt the drain of chakra leaving her. Clink, clink, clink. While Karen knew none of it was there, she could almost feel it, the cold metal of chains encircling her ankles and binding her. They bit into her skin, leaving them raw and stinging painfully. They held her there, and she wondered if that was all her life had ever amounted to. Maybe, she thought, she just wasn't strong enough. Just like her mother hadn't been. Tears pooled up at the corners of Karen's eyes and slid down her cheeks, before landing on her shoulder. It was then, in that instant of utter darkness, that she sensed him. Though his chakra had disappeared for a while now, all of a sudden, she could sense it again, quiet yet resilient, reserved yet beautiful. In a village filled with chakra signatures as numerous as the stars, his alone glowed with the light of a setting sun. Karen clambered up to her feet, her head clearing. That was right. She was no longer a child, trembling in her hut. She was a kunoichi in a shed at the periphery of the Hidden Leaf village. She took a tentative step forward and felt the jerk of chains pulling her back. No, Karen thought again. Eyes still shut, she reached out with her mind's eye, and again, she could feel his chakra signature. The paradoxical cold and warmth of it calmed her pounding heart. You're welcome. In the dark, Karen reached out with her hands and pushed the doors of the shed open. Stepping forward, the warmth of sunlight fell across her face, and the screams of battle that she muted returned at full volume. With the one tail no longer terrorizing the area around the stadium, the leaf appeared to have gained the upper hand. Though the unmoving bodies on the ground were in equal parts leaf mine as they were foreign ninja, the number of active skirmishes had dropped. Naruto knew several large-scale battles were still ongoing the last time he checked. Both the Hokage and Jiraiya had been fighting against two formidable foes. However, with his own chakra reserves on its last legs, the only thing he could do was to have faith in their abilities. Given the circumstances, their primary concern was to keep an eye on Gaara. In the meantime, Sasuke and Sakura had left to help rescue more civilians, and Naruto and the remaining members of Team Kakashi tied up the captured Sannin. This is chakra rope, explained Menma, crouching down to bind the Jonin's wrists. Picked it up from my uncleat blocks chakra flows so that they can't escape. As Menma finished the rest, Kakashi turned to Naruto. The left side of his face was covered, as it usually had been. It felt strange knowing that under the bandages, the infamous Sharingan eye was no longer there. He had to wonder how its absence would affect the Jonin's future. That masked man, started Kakashi. He was there, in Wave Country. He was the one who killed Zabuza. Naruto raised his eyebrows. He had never read the official mission report, and had always assumed Kakashi had been the one to kill the missing Nin. What did he mean by taking back the eye, sensei? I can't say that I know. I'm still thinking about it myself. Are there any Uchiha, other than Sasuke, that are left? There is the one who massacred the clan in the first place, but I knew him, personally, and his fighting style was nothing like the masked man. Kakashi paused. As for what he said to you, I know that I have become busy with my team lately, and you have your own duties now. But Naruto, I hope you know that I consider you well, very highly. While Kakashi seemed to have lost his usual eloquence, Naruto thought he understood. The answers he had been seeking in the outside world, maybe they'd been here this entire time. Somewhere inside of him, something was starting to take shape. While mostly intangible, with a little more effort, he thought he might be able to make something of it. Naruto wondered whether the ramen stall was still intact. I don't know, sensei. What? After that sad showing you made in our match the other week, I don't know if I can take that as a compliment. Kakashi blinked. The corners of his lips twitched upwards. I guess we'll need to have another rematch soon. I'll make you eat those words. Making a non-committal sound, Naruto replied, We'll see. You were never this cheeky to me before, Kakashi sighed. All this, just because we're the same rank now? I never took you for that kind of person. You can blame Jiraiya-sensei for that. Kakashi opened his mouth to reply, when suddenly, Menma let out a shout. Shit, he's waking up. Immediately, Naruto jumped up. It was impossible. The blow he had delivered should have knocked him out for at least an hour. But he realized in a rush that he miscalculated that while a normal person may have been out for an hour, the same rules didn't apply to a Jinchuriki. Mother is angry. That was the first thing Gaara knew when he regained consciousness. Or perhaps, it was what had awoken him. Just as I was freed, you dare to imprison me? His head was groggy. What had happened? Was the village destroyed? Why couldn't he move? Gaara felt his eyes widen as he realized he was tied up. Trussed up with rope and thrown aside, his face pressed into the dirt. As though he was just anybody. You dare? Voices were shouting all around him. Chest heaving, Gaara strained against his bindings. They were strong, but it was nothing for him. Breaking free, he felt his chakra begin to recirculate through his body, and he got to his feet. He felt his body sway. His head was spinning. Everything was black and red. There were no faces, only others. Others who hated him, dreaded him, feared him. His vision was rapidly turning completely red as Mother's chakra oozed out, covering him, sheltering him. As always, Mother was the only one who understood. Gaara started to laugh, the sound ringing out harshly from his chest. He wouldn't just give himself up to Mother, as he had when he fell asleep. No, he would become Mother. Gaara! A voice called out his name. Stop! A concerned face with sandy hair appeared before him. Gaara felt his eyes widen. He knew that face. It couldn't be him. Yashimaru? His uncle, how was he here? Had he somehow returned from the dead? Was he here to complete his mission of assassinating Gaara? With a roar, he slashed the air, hearing a satisfying thud. And then silence. It had all happened in the blink of an eye. One moment, Naruto had been talking with Kakashi just outside the stadium. Next, Gaara was awake, and there was a body on the ground. It was the sand genin named Temari. It may have been a fatal blow, for she didn't stir from where she'd landed. Naruto stared at her broken body. While he never exchanged words with her, he had noticed her from afar. Ninpo, Shinranshin no Ju. Menma's voice cut off as Gaara let out another roar and swiped the air. A whip of sand lashed out at his bidding. Menma! Kakashi shouted. His gaze followed Menma, who just barely managed to dodge the attack before jerking towards Naruto. Do you think you can move? Naruto grimaced. His entire body felt like a wooden block. Don't worry about me. I can still protect myself. Despite his words, there wasn't much he could do anymore, frustrating as it was. Maybe if it had been nighttime, with the moon out, he might have been able to dredge up another shadow clone to summon natural energy, but the way he was now, he didn't think he could even summon a normal clone. "Please untie us," shouted the Sand Jonin, his face stricken. "Temari!" After a pause, Kakashi quickly strode over and cut through the Jonin's bindings with a kunai. "If you turn on us, there will be no more mercy," he said in an icy tone. Rubbing his bruised wrists, the Sand Jonin nodded before rushing to Temari's side. "Will you be okay, sensei?" Naruto asked. Kakashi turned back to him, his eyebrows raised. "I may not have the Sharingan anymore, but I do still have 1,000 under my belt, you know. You watch yourself, Naruto." In a flash, he was gone. The emergency painkiller Kakashi had taken was kicking in. The agony in the left of his skull had ebbed away to a dull, manageable pain, and the fog in his head was clearing. Oddly enough, aside from the blatantly missing eye, Kakashi felt good. While some of it may have been from the adrenaline rushing through him, he had always suspected the ever-active Sharingan to be draining his chakra, not unlike a leech. With it ripped away, Kakashi could feel surges of chakra bellowing up from within. Unlike before, Gaara's body had started to undergo transformation. Half his face had distorted into a sand-colored beast with pitch-black eyes, and the same side of his body had grown a large claw and the beginnings of a tail. It was clear he was an uncontrolled Jinchuriki. Kakashi didn't know whether it was out of any fault of the host, or an indication of a faulty seal. Whichever it was, he felt a surge of pity for the boy. The confusion, the hatred, he couldn't help but see something of Naruto inside Gaara. And maybe a little of himself, as well. "One Tail," he said. "It's time you went back inside." Feral eyes veered, and Gaara sprung towards him. Concentrating a churning ball of chakra into his hand, Kakashi dodged the blow. While his aim would inevitably be off, he'd been making mental adjustments with every movement he took, and without hesitation, Kakashi slammed the Rasengan into Gaara's back. It was a direct hit, albeit on a shield of sand that automatically rose up to meet his fist. Making an explosive dust storm upon impact, a half-scream, half-roar sounded. Landing on his feet, Kakashi silently marveled at how little the Rasengan had drained his chakra reserves. Unfortunately, as expected, the attack seemed to have enraged the Jinchuriki more than injured him, as a gigantic claw suddenly jumped out and swiped at Kakashi. Quickly summoning a shadow clone, Kakashi swapped places with it, leaving it to distract Gaara while he observed from the shadow of a shattered building. Kakashi could batter at it however long he needed. It would be tough to get through the sand defenses of the infuriated Jinchuriki. At least, not without an unacceptable level of collateral damage to the village. "Sensei," said Menma, appearing beside him. "Should I try using my mind transfer on him?" "No," Kakashi replied immediately. "His mind's too unstable right now." "Then what should I do?" Before Kakashi could answer, he heard a high-pitched shout in the distance. "Naruto!" Bodies lined the streets and fire swept across the rooftops, but none of that mattered to Karen. Her chest heaving, the sound of her heart pounded explosively in her ears. Her mouth was dry, her throat sour with bile. "Please make it on time." Karen didn't know what had happened, but in the space of mere minutes, somehow, his chakra signature had grown weaker than she'd ever seen it before. The elation that had been carrying her turned into terror, and it made her feel sick to the stomach. It was a terrible and strange feeling. Terrible, because Karen couldn't bear to even think about what would happen if that particular chakra signature were to be extinguished. And strange, because Karen knew that her feelings were one-sided. Karen wasn't stupid. She knew that to him, she was just a nobody from a foreign village. But it didn't matter because to her, he was special. When she had been starving, he had given her fish to eat. It warmed her belly for a single night, and it was the best thing she had eaten in a long, long time. He barely seemed to remember, but that didn't matter. Karen remembered. There in the distance, she saw him. A dot that grew bigger and bigger, to reveal a red-headed male in leaf fatigues. His chakra signature, while weak, was still hanging on. There was a monstrous signature nearby, the same one that had erupted in the stadium and started this whole mess, but that didn't matter. What was important was that he was there, breathing. "Naruto!" she shouted eagerly. However, the wind carried her voice away from him, and she felt the monster instead turn its attention towards her. Its face twisted, and it leaped towards her. With a screech, the world seemed to slow down around her. Eyes widening, she followed the monster's trajectory through the air. The moment it reached her, she knew she would die. Clink. She would die, without having ever escaped her village. Clink. Clink. Without having killed Zosui. Clink, clink, clink. Without ever seeing the stars again. Clink, clink, clink. Without ever meeting Naruto again. No! Something within her, everything that had been coiled up tightly inside for a long time, exploded. In a burst of color, the world returned to its normal speed. Chains, glowing brightly with chakra, flew out of Karen, wrapping themselves around the beast. Kakashi could hardly believe his eyes, a red-haired woman, with chains coming out of her body that wrapped themselves around a tailed beast. Kushina? No, it couldn't be. She died years ago, on the same night that had claimed the fourth Hokage. The woman before him must have been another survivor of the Uzumaki clan, and now that he looked closer, it was true. This particular woman wore glasses, and behind them were a pair of striking crimson eyes. Kakashi vaguely recalled seeing her before. She was a Kusa-genin participating in the Chunin exams at the time. He'd even teased Naruto about her. He never expected to see that technique again, and it couldn't have come at a more opportune time. However, it looked as though she didn't know how to properly utilize the chains. Instead of completely subjugating Gaara, the chains were merely pinning the Jinchuriki down on the ground. Like a feral animal that had been caught in a trap, Gaara struggled for freedom, roaring in anger. He was more beast than human at this point. He was out of control, and he was destroying their village. It was unfortunate, but it left Kakashi with only one viable option. He drew in a deep breath and made up his mind. Palming a kunai from his holster, he began to channel lightning chakra into it. The ear-splitting sound of chirping birds filled the air. Without his Sharingan, he couldn't use the lightning cutter the way he'd used to, but on an immobilized opponent, this would be more than enough. Onlai couldn't guarantee Gaara's survival. Wait! Shouted the Sanjonin, standing up to block Kakashi's path. He held the dead girl's limp body in his arms. Kakashi could barely hear his voice over the sound of his, and had to read his lips to catch his words. You can't kill him! Kakashi resolutely shook his head. With a screaming sound, the kunai shone a bright blue. It was ready to go. Let me talk to him, begged the Jonin. Just give me a few seconds. Without waiting for Kakashi's response, the Jonin raced over to stand in front of the struggling Jinchuriki. What is this? Unlike the ropes from before, Gaara couldn't free himself. The things weighing him down looked like chains, but they must have been imbued with an unbelievable amount of chakra, for he couldn't even budge. With a gnash of his teeth, Gaara screamed in frustration. His head was spinning. The world was red, and the others around him were jeering. He couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't take it anymore. Gaara! Again. Why did they keep calling out his name? This time, it was a man with red markings on his face, Baki. He may have been Gaara's team leader, but in the end he, too, was another. Gaara didn't need him. He raised his and mother's arm to bat him aside, when suddenly, Baki lifted up a body in his arms. Look at what you've done, Gaara! For some reason, tears were streaming down the Jonin's face. You've killed Temari! Your own sister! Temari? What was Baki talking about? That wasn't Temari. That was Yashimaru, his first would-be assassin. Temari was back home with Kankuroshi was. The body, its hair was tied up in pigtails. And her framite was a woman's body. Gaara froze. Temari. Suddenly, through the red haze, he remembered. His sister had accompanied him to the Chunin exams. They'd had ramen together just a few nights ago. And she'd been the one to signal to him during his match in the third exam. I killed her? Impossible as it seemed, Gaara stopped struggling. The one-tail's characteristics began to fade from the Jinchuriki. As the oversized arm and tail began to shrink, the chakra chains tightened in sync. Soon, only Gaara in his fully human form was left. It seemed Kakashi had been wrong. There had been another option. He just hadn't been able to see it. He was glad to be proven wrong. Slowly, Kakashi lowered his kunai, and the shrill sound of birds faded away into the air. Kakashi of the Sharingan, said a cold voice to his left. This is for Zabuza. Before he could react, something pierced through his back, ramming straight into his heart. His eyes widened. He looked down, to see a bloody needle protruding from his chest. Suddenly, he couldn't speak. With the last of his rapidly fading strength, he looked back and saw a mask, a hunter nin. Kakashi stumbled, before dropping to his knees. Someone was shouting, but he couldn't make out the words. Everything was growing dark. His chest was unbearably tight. He couldn't breathe. Was he dying? It was true what they said about your last moments. Kakashi could see his life flashing before his eyes. The faces of his loved ones surrounded him. His father, the once renowned white fan of the leaf. Obito. Rin. Minato-sensei. Mayu. Rai. Everyone he'd ever held dear, they'd all gone before him, leaving him behind. It has been hard. But he was a shinobi, and he had endured alone as best as he could. No, that's not quite right. He hadn't been quite alone. He still had. Nah. Chapter 40, My Friend. Though Jiraiya had battled countless opponents of all shapes and sizes over the years, he was finding it difficult to believe that the man before him was actually human. Scuttling across the rooftops on all fours, an iron tail whipped out from the man's cloak towards Jiraiya, who leaped backwards. Without pause, the man's mouth opened, and a barrage of needles rapidly shot out. They would have hit Jiraiya, if it weren't for his white mane technique protecting him. As it was, the needles deflected off and bounced harmlessly down to the ground. Landing a distance away, Jiraiya waited for his opponent to pursue him. However, as he'd suspected, the man didn't move from his rooftop. It seemed that no matter how many times Jiraiya attempted to move the battle outside of the village walls, the man wouldn't follow him. It was clear that while his intended opponent was Jiraiya, his primary goal was to protect the perimeter of the barrier walling off the Hokage and Orochimaru. That alone told Jiraiya his opponent was different from the others he'd faced in the organization so far. Rather than fighting for the love of battle or to quench his bloodthirst, this man fought with purpose. This was an issue, of course, because it meant that Jiraiya couldn't summon Gamabunta. And while Jiraiya thought he could eventually outmaneuver the puppeteer, with the village as a battleground, he wanted to minimize collateral damage as much as possible. Jiraiya-sama, are you alright? A dark-haired ninja appeared beside him, with a team of 3 young shinobi in tow. If it isn't Asuma! Exclaimed Jiraiya. Don't write me off just because I've started to develop a bit of a gut. Lips rearing back in a grim smile, Asuma held up a pair of blades. I wouldn't dream of it. We're here to help. What's your plan for this clown? Funny you should ask. Biting into his thumb, Jiraiya painted 2 red lines on his face and brought his hands together. I can't take my hands apart for a while, so I'm going to need you all to buy me some time. While it would have been faster to travel in her transformed state, the blue flames were too conspicuous, and Yujito did not like her odds against a long-ranged opponent. A distance away in the sky, she could make out the white speck that was the strange flying organism belonging to the Akatsuki intruders. Hiding her presence as best as she could while maintaining a pace that wouldn't falter behind, Yujito had been following their tail for the past few hours. They had since left Lightning Country behind and were now skirting the border of Frost Country. Either that, or they were already in Hot Water Country. Yujito wasn't always the best at sensing direction. Slowly but surely, Yujito could feel the drain of the past day beginning to weigh her down. The village had burned down to ashes. The wreckage was gone. Her friends were all dead or missing. I, for one, am finding this new situation very agreeable, purred the 2 tails. Despite herself, Yujito didn't even have the energy to snap back as she usually did. It wasn't as though she had expected the cat demon to have any tact in the first place. She had far more pressing matters to consider. Unexpectedly, her silence seemed to unsettle the 2 tails, and it fell blissfully silent, allowing Yujito to think as she raced through the tundra, eyes fixed on her target. The moment to strike would be when the intruders landed. Whether her opponents were number 1 or two, or the entire Akatsuki organization, it didn't matter. Yujito didn't know if Killer Bee was even alive, nor what the Akatsuki were trying to accomplish. But she couldn't leave him behind. Not again. Watch out! Asuma, who had been weaving in and out of their opponent's offensive, let out a roar as another storm of rain down on a rooftop. His lone female student threw herself out of the way in the nick of time when suddenly she froze, collapsing in a heap of limbs. A small gash on her arm gleamed bright red. It seemed a single needle had brushed against her. Poison? Ino! Shouted her teammates, rushing to her side. As Jiraiya had feared, their opponent seemed to be overpowering Asuma and his team. It was difficult to sit back and allow them to cover for him. Fortunately, his preparations were nearly complete. In a burst of cloudy smoke, two toads appeared on his shoulders. Fukasaku and Shima, his longtime allies who gathered natural energy for him. And I thought you didn't like this form, said Fukasaku. Jiraiya grimaced, as he felt his nose growing bulbous. Now is not the time to be particular about my appearance. His senses rapidly scaling up, Jiraiya noticed something interesting about his opponent. Everything he could see of the man, whether it was the face, oddly stiff in its movements, or the tail, appeared to be connected to thin chakra threads. A puppet. That explained the unnaturalness of his enemy. It wasn't human after all, but a puppet. Jiraiya had heard of the rumors of the master puppeteer within the Akatsuki's ranks, and now he had a face for the name. Sasori of the Red Sand. Unlike a normal puppet, however, the chakra threads appeared to be leading inwards. Jiraiya had never seen the like, and yet the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. Was the actual puppeteer inside the puppet? Fall back! Jiraiya shouted to Asuma. Take your team to safety! Asuma grimly regarded his student, before looking up at the rooftop beyond Sasori at the violet barrier surrounding the Hokage and Orochimaru. Looking torn, he said, Please protect my father? You underestimate that old man, said Jiraiya. He'll be fine. His tone must have been overly jovial. Asuma only responded with a grim nod, before picking up his student and disappearing. The sage, Jiraiya, said Sasori, the puppet's tail arched inquisitively. I've heard much about you. You will make a most excellent addition to my collection. It happened in the blink of an eye. Shima and Fukasaku's tongues burst out, and Jiraiya leaped forward. One muscular tongue wrapped around Sasori's tail, neutralizing it, while the other bound the puppet's mouth. Jiraiya pulled back his hand to raise again the puppet to oblivion, when Sasori raised his left arm, revealing what appeared to be a torpedo. A good puppet master always had another trick up his sleeve. But they had never had to face off against the Toad Sage. Jiraiya's white mane rose up to defend him from the impending shrapnel, and his fist connected solidly with the head of Sasori's puppet. The puppet was surprisingly durable. While it was a blow that would have pulverized anyone else's head into pieces, in the case of the puppet, its face caved inwards before the entire puppet blew back, spinning bodily through the air. It crashed into the roof of a nearby building, sending the entire infrastructure crumbling to the ground. Jiraiya winced. Oh dear. Jiraiya, chided Shima. There's no time for that now, the barrier, Fukasaku urged. With one last look down at the rising smoke, Jiraiya leaped up the tiled rooftops to his target. 4 violet walls rose up around several different figures who appeared to be locked in combat. Several? Taking in the faces of the new combatants, Jiraiya realized with a jolt. They were the first and second Hokage, apparently back from the dead to follow Orochimaru's every bidding. Just what had his old teammate been up to over the years? Several ANBU, apparently helpless to do anything besides shout verbal encouragement, observed the battle from outside the barrier. Even if the shape and form are the same, they're neither the first nor second Hokage. I know, responded the third. Despite his words, Jiraiya knew his teacher. The internal turmoil he must have been feeling at fighting the previous Hokage would no doubt cause him to subconsciously hold himself back. Jiraiya had to step in, and fast. Besides, this was his fight. But before he could make a move, Jiraiya tensed and leaped up, just as a wave of puppet arms crashed into the rooftop. As he flew back, he looked down to see a red-headed man in Akatsuki robes regarding him from the ground. A large, hulking puppet hovered in the air behind him. I'd been wondering when you'd clamber out of that wreckage, Jiraiya called out. Ajisai's mission had seemed simple enough: keep an eye on the Jinchuriki, and if it seemed like he was going to get away, crush the wooden scarab they'd given her. Presumably it would alert whoever was controlling the scarab. However, it was easier said than done, as was usually the case. Once the Jinchuriki transformed, Ajisai and Haku were forced to retreat, and Ajisai was forcibly reminded of the existence of powers she couldn't even fathom. It was another awe-inspiring display of Lord Payne's prowess, and she was honored to be even given the chance to observe from afar. But for some reason, this time, Ajisai found it harder to swallow than usual. Surprisingly, the hidden leaf didn't back down without a fight. After several others kept the beast at bay for some time, Ajisai watched in disbelief as a leaf nin eventually showed up and, with a single blow, forced the beast to transform back into the Jinchuriki. It was a world utterly unbeknownst to her, and Ajisai was prepared to crush the scarab when Haku stopped her with a shake of his head. She might have been preparing herself to turn him over to the hidden sound, but she trusted him. That was, until Haku suddenly disappeared. Ajisai froze, and looked around. Where had he gone? While he'd been quiet all day, she had attributed it to the mysterious seal. All of a sudden, she began to frantically wonder if he'd somehow overheard her conversation with the Jonin. In a flash, Haku reappeared. Or at least, she thought it was him. He was wearing a mask she'd never seen before. Taking a lurching step, Haku stumbled towards her, and she rushed to support him. Haku, what did you do? Run, he gritted out. The trees rustled, and a young blonde leaf nin appeared on the other side of the clearing. As soon as he caught sight of them, his face contorted in such fury, Ajisai felt herself take an inadvertent step back. Shinranshin no Jutsu, mind destruction technique, cried the leaf nin. While Haku dove to the side, Ajisai felt something very strange happen to her body. Against her will, each hand drew a kunai from her holster. As she watched on in horror, she lunged at her teammate. Clang! A blade that hadn't been there a moment before struck out to meet hers. Ajisai found herself face to face with an Anbu mask, another leaf nin. Before she could cry out, the Anbu parried her other kunai, before snaking below her defenses and elbowing her in the face. Ajisai felt her nose crack. As she let out a cry of pain, her hands reached up to her face, and she realized she was back in control of her limbs. The leaf nin yelled, "Hey, I was control," he broke off. Eyes watering and her hands full of blood, Ajisai looked up to see the leaf nin collapse to the ground. The Anbu turned towards her. "Are you alright?" "Sorry about that." "Who are you?" Ajisai demanded thickly. "Don't worry, I am on your side." Reaching up with a hand, the Anbu removed his mask to reveal a young man with glasses. "You can call me Kabuto." Following the third Kazekage's mysterious and abrupt disappearance, the sudden power vacuum from his absence had left the hidden sand in a state of chaos. It would not be an understatement to say that the third's disappearance had played a critical role in the beginning of the hidden sand's decline. Even now, years later, Jiraiya knew that the village was still searching for the man who'd once been hailed as the strongest Kazekage ever. Now, Jiraiya knew exactly what had happened to the third. He had become Sasori's human puppet. A wave of black iron powder crashed onto the ground just as Jiraiya leaped away. He felt a particle just barely miss his skin, and a shiver ran down his spine. He knew that a single instant's contact could have very well ended him. The depths to which man could fall would never cease to astound Jiraiya. Sasori had sacrificed a brilliant future with the hidden sand in order to obtain the third's iron sand. While it seemed the peak of foolishness to Jiraiya, perhaps the exchange was worth it for some. Jiraiya didn't know too much about the legendary technique, but he knew that if he hadn't had the toads on his shoulders gathering natural energy for him, the battle may very well have already reached its conclusion. Suddenly, Jiraiya's eyes widened. He turned back, his heart lurching violently. Just barely visible through the walls of the purple barrier, a gaunt specter with horns rose out from behind the third Hokage. "Sensei," he breathed. "No!" As though listening to his pleas, the walls suddenly vanished, and Jiraiya realized the sound nin must have released the barricade. Without a second's thought, Jiraiya launched himself through the air. When he landed, Jiraiya found himself in his worst nightmare, one that he couldn't wake up from. With a single glance, he knew in an instant what had just taken place, what the third had sacrificed. Orochimaru's arms hung like two slabs of meat from his shoulders. His stricken eyes were fixed on the third as the latter fell lifelessly to the ground. "Sensei!" cried Jiraiya, rushing to his teacher's side. He propped up the third on his lap, shaking him, all the while knowing it was futile. The Reaper death seal was unbreakable, and no matter what, the user paid the price with their life. The third stirred, his mouth drawing back in a last smile. "Jiraiya, I leave it to you." And then he was gone. In the stark sunlight, without the shade of the Hokage's hat, Jiraiya saw how lined the third's face had become over the years. Bowing his head, he carefully lowered the body to the ground, marveling at how someone once regarded as a god could have become something so fragile. "Let's go," he heard Orochimaru grit through his teeth to his subordinates, who jumped to their leader's side. "I leave it to you." Standing up, Jiraiya took a deep breath. He looked towards Orochimaru. There, in his gaunt face, Jiraiya found no trace of sadness or regret. There was only anger and hatred, and he felt his heart lurch at the realization. Jiraiya took a step towards Orochimaru. And then another. To the others watching, all they must have seen was a blur. But to Jiraiya, each step that brought him closer seemed to stretch into eternity. "Eventually, there shall come a day when you will be forced to make a critical decision. That choice you make will decide which way the change goes." He had run from this decision for years, refusing to choose. He had hoped that by sticking to the path of a pacifist, it would all work out on its own. That he could become someone who could change the hearts of people with his stories. That his fragmented team would each find their way home. However, after having hoped and waited for so long, the third was gone and the village was in flames, and all at once, Jiraiya understood some people didn't change. Not because they couldn't, but because they chose not to. While it was a bitter pill to swallow, Jiraiya knew that he couldn't run from it any longer. Memories of the past flashed through Jiraiya's head as he drew close. Orochimaru's eyes widened. Fukasaku and Shima's tongues thrust out at Orochimaru's subordinates, batting them aside. They had once fought on the same team, and Jiraiya had loved Orochimaru as a brother. He would have done anything for him. He would have died for him. Jiraiya pulled back his arm, a mass of chakra churning wildly in his hand. "Goodbye, my friend," he said soberly. A lone man, dressed simply in mesh armor and pants, staggered from the forest clearing surrounding the hidden leaf. Momentarily hunching over on his knees to catch his breath, he glanced up at the sight of rising smoke from beyond the walls. A shadow of a grimace twisting his mouth, he ripped off his eight and threw it to the side. A slashed leaf briefly gleamed in the light before tumbling to the ground. The man lurched forward, his mind racing. He had never expected to return to the hidden leaf this way, a skeleton of his former self, muscle withered away to skin and bone. It hurt to even breathe, so walking was excruciating. And yet, he had to move, so he did, joints creaking in protest with every step he took, lungs burning with every cough. It was after what felt like an eternity that the man reached the gates. While they should have been strictly manned, they had been abandoned and left ajar. Nonetheless, feeling some trepidation, he stepped inside, waiting for a challenge that never came. All too easily, the village sprawled out before him. He felt his stomach plummet. Even way out here, the bodies on the streets were plainly visible. While most appeared to be ninja killed in action, he could make out the remains of some unlucky civilians as well, and the sight caused his heart to ache. It was a pain even more visceral than the one he felt every waking moment. He would have wept if he'd had the strength. What was the point of it all? Had so many innocent lives been sacrificed for the mere purpose of staving off the leaf's destruction? He had once left the village a traitor and a murderer, and he now returned to it a dying man. He had been foolish to think that all of his plans could have made a difference. Despite his efforts, everything had gone awry, leaving him with nothing but the sense that he was a lone cog in a machine that followed no one's bidding. Still, this was his last chance. He didn't know how much longer he had left. Days? Hours? It was time to put all of his plans to the side. What mattered now was that in whatever time he had left, this was his last chance to deliver all the information he had gathered over the years. His last chance to see his brother. Chapter 41 The Rain Stops. When Kakashi stumbled forward and Naruto instinctively jumped out to grab him, His first thought was that it had to be a clone. Kakashi had to have switched himself with a body replacement. Any second now, the clone would dissipate, and the Jonin would jump down from a tree, with a hand holding Jiraiya's latest book. But Kakashi didn't disappear, and Naruto instead found himself staring down at a graying face. The bloody tip of a blade poked out from the Jonin's chest. It was a blow strong enough to have dissipated even a shadow clone. Which could only mean one thing. "Sensei," Naruto said dumbly. When Kakashi didn't respond, he turned to the bound Sannin. "Can any of you heal?" Suddenly, he thought of all the times he'd passed over a medical ninjutsu scroll in favor of a ninjutsu one, and he felt his stomach twist. "It's unfortunate," said the Sand Jonin. "A blade straight through the heart like that." His throat turned dry. Naruto swallowed hard. "What are you trying to say?" It was a stupid question. The Sand Jonin looked plainly down at Kakashi in response. Naruto followed his gaze and saw that his teacher's face had turned ashen. That had to be wrong, so Naruto pressed his fingers to the crease of his neck and he couldn't find a pulse. Everything in Naruto's head was starting to spin. How could this be happening? Not 10 minutes ago, they'd been talking by the stadium. They were going to have a rematch soon. "Sensei," he repeated. Again, there was no response. Naruto's grip slackened, and Kakashi's hand dropped limply to the ground. Seeing that, Naruto felt something deep inside him tremble. "Watch out!" a voice cried. Dazed, Naruto looked up. An ANB wielding a blade had just broken out of the trees and was now heading straight for him. Was it an enemy disguised as one of their own? As drained as he was, it would have been a simple matter for him to parry the attack with his tanto. But he didn't move. Instead, he was suddenly filled with a deluge of thoughts and faces. His childhood caretaker Mayu's mother. The other Jinchuriki was taken by the Akatsuki before him. Rai. Mayu. Shirokamo. The undercover agent in Earth Country. Temari. And now Kakashi? There were so many that had died before him. Because of him. If not for him, would they still be alive? The ANBU was almost on top of him, the blade flashing in the sunlight, and Naruto thought fleetingly. Did it matter? Her eyes bulging, Karen couldn't believe what she was seeing. Why isn't he moving? The ANBU attacker, seizing the opportunity, had gone straight for Naruto. It left him wide open, and knowing Naruto, he had ample opportunity to evade the attack. And yet, for some reason, he didn't move. Eyes fixed upon the descending blade, she jerked forward. The chains had disappeared once Gaara had fallen unconscious, and they didn't come out of her a second time. She was going to be too late. "Naruto!" she screamed. Clang! All of a sudden, a blade met the ANBU's blade. It took Karen another second to process that it was Naruto's. Somehow, suddenly, Naruto had responded. The blow had sent the ANBU jerking back. His mask dislodged and fell off his face, to reveal a young man with glasses. At that, a faint look of surprised recognition flickered across Naruto's face. "You work for Akatsuki?" The man's lips curled back. "I thought I'd try my luck," he said, without responding to Naruto's question. But his gaze shot to the side, where Gaara lay unconscious. While Karen's chains had since disappeared, the Sand Jonin hovered protectively in front of him. "Guess I'll take my chances another time." Almost mockingly, he adjusted his glasses and then taking a step back, he disappeared. A beat past, Naruto staggered. Snapping back to attention, Karen hurried forward. "Naruto!" Without thinking, she grabbed him by the arm. Why hadn't he been moving before? "Are you hurt?" "Stop," said Naruto. Karen blinked. "Stop what?" "Stop talking to me as if you know me." "Naruto. Let go of me." When Karen didn't move, Naruto raised his voice. "Let go of me." Frightened, Karen released his arm. She'd never seen him like this before. Instinctively, she searched blindly for his chakra signature, and what she found caused her heart to plummet. When they had fought in the Chunin exams in Wind Country all those years ago, he had been ruthless and intent, focused solely on his own team. When she had caught sight of Naruto in Grass Country, his chakra had seemed meandering, but still purposeful. When they had crossed paths in the forest of death and on the training fields, he had been reserved and controlled. Now, looking at Naruto, the only word that came to Karen's mind was lost. And the cause of it all, Karen's gaze drew down to the still body in his arms. Was he Naruto's teacher? The man's chakra signature was rapidly fading away, but she could still catch a glimmer of something. Naruto, I might be able to help. Naruto didn't respond. Perhaps he hadn't heard, or perhaps he was ignoring her. Whichever the case, time was running out. Karen felt her jaw set. While she had never healed anyone who was unconscious before, she had to try. Wrenching open the man's mouth with one free hand, Naruto jerked. She pushed her arm against his teeth. She felt canines pierce her skin, and blood, glowing with her life force, dripped down into his mouth. Karen could feel herself rapidly losing strength, but she clenched her arm, squeezing every drop she could into the other man. Nothing happened. What are you doing? Ignoring Naruto, Karen screamed, "Bite!" A moment passed. And another. Where am I? The sun was just rising early in the morning, and the villagers were out at the market. Walking along a path winding through the village, he bounced excitedly on the balls of his feet. Excited? Him? Kakashi, said a voice he hadn't heard in a long time. He looked up, to see his father smiling down at him. Dad. Are you that happy about finally starting to attend the academy tomorrow? He returned the smile. Yeah. We should get something to celebrate. What would you like? Oi, Kakashi. A new voice interrupted his thoughts. There you are, you bastard! He veered around to see Obito and Rin speeding up to catch up to him. When he looked back, his father was gone. Is something wrong, Kakashi? Asked Rin curiously. It's nothing, he answered. The sun was high in the sky, beating its heat down on the back of his neck. Suddenly, something hard cracked down on his head, and he winced. Kakashi, I heard from Minato that you almost got killed on that last mission. And now, Kushina, let's not exaggerate, came his teacher's voice. You're telling me 10 cracked ribs and a leg in a cast is an exaggeration? Slowly, with a limp to his step, he backed away from the enraged woman, when he felt something bump into his back. He turned to see two genin regarding him suspiciously. Kakashi-sensei, said Rai. Don't you think it's about time you showed us what's under that mask? Well, how about some ramen? He said. If you're quick enough, you might be able to catch something. Rai's face brightened, but Mayu shook her head in disappointment. So you can eat your fill and then leave us with the check again, sensei? He smiled. Can't get anything past you, can I? He looked up at the sky. The sun was starting to set, and the air was cooling. He thought he could catch the faint outline of the moon in the distance. Come on, sensei, hurry up, I'm starving, said Rai. Sensei? Aren't you coming? Mayu asked curiously. Oddly enough, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. But he couldn't quite put his finger on what it is. I'm coming, he said jovially, trying to brush it off. Just as he was about to follow his students' backs, he felt a hand grab his arm. Sensei, said a voice. Kakashi opened his eyes. It took a moment to reorient himself. His body was aching. He could feel a strange chakra rushing through him, stitching him back together. The missing eye no longer seared, and the injury in his chest had been reduced to a mere throb. And through it all, Naruto's blurry face looked down at him, shocked and uncertain. Sensei? That's me, Kakashi croaked. Red locks of hair spilled around him. Looking to his side, Kakashi saw the girl who had reminded him of Kushina. She was unconscious, her face pale and drawn. There was a metallic taste in his mouth, blood. But before he could think on it much further, he felt his head spinning and then once again, he lost consciousness. Hinata was beginning to lose track of how many she'd been able to save, and how many she'd eased of their suffering. Thankfully, she wasn't alone. She'd run into several other medicnine, and they'd divided the village into sectors for each to cover. In the face of such disaster, the fact that Hinata was able to contribute in this way brought a sense of burgeoning pride in her chosen line of work. She wondered what her father would think if he were to see her now. Lowering her hands from her latest patient, Hinata turned to the worried Chunin. I've stabilized her condition for now, but got her to the hospital. I heard that the ANBU has erected a barrier, so you should be safe there. Thank you, said the Chunin, scooping up her patient. While her face was still pale, her breathing had somewhat eased. If there's anything I can do. Go! With a nod, the Chunin disappeared. Hinata let out an exhale, and stood up. As expected, she was starting to feel the strain of using her Byakugan so many times. Fortunately, the battle seemed to be winding down. While the number of wounded was still disproportionate to the number of available helping hands, the injuries were becoming less critical in nature. Hinata had turned to move on to the next district, when she heard a sound. Coughing? Reactivating her Byakugan, Hinata held up her hands in a defensive position and cautiously advanced. There was a man there, hidden behind what used to be a pharmacy but was now a smoking ruin. Hinata turned the corner and saw the man, deathly pale with black hair. She'd never seen him before, but somehow, he looked oddly familiar. Just as he came into view, he hunched over and heaved. Blood splattered the ground. She didn't know whether he was an ally or an enemy. But she had made an oath to protect the injured, and so she asked, "Are you all right?" At the sound of her voice, the man jerked, his eyes weary and unfocused. For a moment, he looked up at her, but Hinata had the odd sense he wasn't really looking at her at all. An instant later, he broke out into another bloody coughing fit. It had been a stupid question. She could tell from a single glance that he was dying. Without any further hesitation, Hinata rushed forward. The moment she touched him, the man stiffened, but as soon as the glow of medical ninjutsu emanated from her hands, the lines in his face relaxed a margin. As Hinata further examined his body, she felt her brow crease. This man wasn't a casualty of the battle. No, the illness in his body was one that had advanced over many years. Judging from the level of damage to his internal organs, it looked as though it had started in his lungs, before spreading to the rest of his body. His liver and kidneys were also beyond repair, likely a result of abusing pain medication. Hinata had seen the like in some older shinobi, though it was her first time seeing this level of destruction in such a relatively young man. It was a miracle he was even conscious. For a moment, Hinata considered doing what she had done for so many others so far, stop the weak beating of his heart, and allow the man to go peacefully. It was likely the kindest option, given how much pain he must have been in. But just as she laid her hands over his heart, she heard him whisper hoarsely, "Sasuke." Hinata stopped. As in Uchiha Sasuke? After a moment's pause, she drew back. Placing her hands instead over his head, she pressed several key points in the man's brain. Slowly, Hinata felt him relax as pain-relieving endorphins spread throughout his body. There wasn't much else she could do for him. Even with the help of her Byakugan, it was far beyond Hinata's capabilities. The disease racking his body was like a million little dust particles scattered throughout his system, destroying him from the inside out. But something in his eyes told her that he wasn't ready to go quite yet. Hinata decided she would take him to the hospital, and once the battle was over, she would look for Sasuke. Though she didn't know him very well, she'd barely talked to him. Even though they'd been in the same academy year, she figured there must be a good reason for the dying man to have called his name. Lightning flashed. The sound of 1,000 chirping birds echoed through the clearing. Before the team of enemy ninja could even retaliate, Sasuke had ripped through their abdomens in a line. 3 bodies fell in an identical slump to the ground. The ear-splitting sound faded as he straightened, his eyes glowing dully with the Sharingan. "Sasuke!" warned Sakura. She needn't have wasted her breath. Sasuke was already turning, his kunai moving in a blur as it slashed across what appeared to be a humanoid puppet creeping up on him. His eyes followed the faint glow of chakra string connecting the puppet to its master, and he followed with a quick flurry of shuriken. His aim was true. In a rustling sound, a 4th body toppled out of a tree, landing hard on the ground. Sakura ran up to Sasuke, her eyes shining with admiration. "That was amazing! But I expected nothing less from you." Without responding, Sasuke regarded the bodies on the ground. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Was this enough? Had he managed to close the distance even just a little? With the way he was now, would he be able to defeat Kakashi? Naruto? His brother? I hope everyone's okay, said Sakura, looking back at the rooftops peeking over in the distance. Do you think we should head back? They'll be fine, Sasuke replied. I'm going to check the perimeter once again. Without waiting for a response, he took off. Sakura's footsteps soon followed him. What you found out there, was it worth it, leaving behind everything? When he had asked the question that night, Naruto's response hadn't been what Sasuke had expected. If you have to ask, you already know the answer? Eyes narrowing, Sasuke felt his pace pick up in speed. The surrounding scenery became a blur. Sakura's footsteps faded behind him. Jiraiya-sama. An ANBU appeared before him, his head bowed in deference. The Sound Nin have been taken to be interrogated, as you ordered. The Aim Nin have retreated, and the remaining Sand Nin have all surrendered. Very good, he answered faintly. As soon as the barrier had gone down, with Jiraiya distracted, the missing Nin Sasori had disappeared from battle. Presumably, he had fled the village. With how desperately the Hidden Sand had been searching for the third Kazekage, they would no doubt be very interested in the information Jiraiya now had for them. It begged the question of just how involved the Sand had been in the invasion, as well as how deeply the Akatsuki had managed to infiltrate each village. Jiraiya-sama, what is your next command? It seemed some of the ANBU had taken the third's dying words quite literally. I leave it to you. Maybe they had been meant to be taken that way. His heart sinking, Jiraiya thought of what inevitably lay ahead. A thorough search would have to be conducted of the Hidden Leaf as well. Given Sasori's level of mastery in puppetry, Jiraiya would have been surprised if they hadn't slipped a sleeper agent or two within their ranks. It would go a long way towards explaining how such a disaster had managed to sneak up right under their noses. Standing on the rooftop, Jiraiya surveyed the smoking remains of the village around him. A cold breeze swept through the area, a lone leaf swirled through the air. When Kakashi opened his eyes again, he was no longer on the battlefield. He was in a makeshift hospital room, with an N4 attached to his arm. It seemed like a supremely unnecessary gesture. Kakashi hadn't felt this great in years. Whatever it was that had fixed him had completely healed even his cracked ribs from his bout with Naruto the previous week. It was dimly lit. It may have been night, or it could have been a new day. Kakashi couldn't tell due to the curtains that surrounded his bed, separating him from his neighbors. The groans and murmurs of a dozen others sounded in his vicinity. A single figure sat beside the bed, red head resting in his hands. Naruto? Said Kakashi. At the sound of his voice, Naruto immediately looked up. Seeing Kakashi's face, his expression melted into relief. You're awake. What happened? That Hunter Nin who was with Zabuza sneaked up on you. I see. I was being too careless. Kakashi swallowed hard, silently rebuking himself. But Naruto shook his head. No, it's my fault. I didn't kill that Hunter Nin when I had the chance, and he tried to get his revenge. Kakashi winced. The acute memory of being stabbed through his chest was coming back to him in fragments. He came at me in my blind spot. Raising himself up on his elbows, he touched a hand to his bandaged chest. I thought I was a goner for sure. Thank you, Naruto. It wasn't me. Oh? Karen is the one who healed you. Karen? Kakashi repeated thoughtfully. One after another, the girl was full of surprises. Well, I'll have to thank her personally then, when I can. Privately, he thought he would have to inquire after her lineage, as well. Naruto nodded. Yes. How's the rest of the village? Any more deaths? Said Kakashi as lightly as he could. Menma tried to go after Haku, but well, he's in stable condition now. And last I heard from Sasuke and Sakura, they were still in the search party for the wounded. Anyone else? The Hokage is dead. Kakashi breathed in sharply. Raising a hand to the bridge of his nose, he pinched it. Ah. For a moment, the two were silent. Several beds over, the occupant began to cough up what sounded like half of their lung. Suddenly, Kakashi thought of the last time they'd been in the hospital together back during the Chunin exams, in the Hidden Sand, when Naruto had passed out from the effects of the taboo seal. That time around, Naruto had been the one in the hospital bed. You know none of this is your fault, if that's what you're thinking, said Kakashi. Naruto shrugged. Even if it's not my fault, I am one of the reasons this happened. Both today and before. He wasn't wrong about that. Wherever tragedy struck around Naruto, his Jinchuriki status had always played a role. Is everything alright, Naruto? You're the one in the hospital. You know what I mean. Silence ensued. The curtains surrounding the bed jostled as a pair of cursing medics ran by. Kakashi felt his foot fall asleep. Finally, Naruto said quietly, "It's hard, sensei." I know. Does it ever get easier? Kakashi considered it, thinking of all the times he had prayed at his former teammates' graves himself. A bit over time. There was no response from Naruto, who instead looked down at his lap. Kakashi felt his gaze soften. His student had led a difficult life, exceptionally so, even for a ninja. And when Naruto kept so much to himself, it was increasingly easier to forget how young he still was. The curtains shook again. This time, someone entered the adjacent room. As voices started to murmur, Naruto got up to leave. Kakashi cleared his throat. Our team lets visit their graves together soon. It was something he had meant to bring up for some time now, and he felt ashamed it had taken him so long to finally do so. Naruto stopped, his back turned to Kakashi. A beat passed, a still moment in which unfamiliar voices sounded in the dim light, and Kakashi held his breath. And then, he nodded. Right, he said in a tight voice. As was standard procedure on the battlefield, Hinata was stopped by the ANBU manning the barrier surrounding the hospital. My name is Hyuga Hinata. I'm a Chunin-level medic nin, here to transfer a patient for intensive care. Did you identify the patient? No, I could not. The ANBU nodded, and stepped back to signal the others to temporarily grant them entry when his head veered down towards the man's face. In any other situation, it would have been almost comical how far back the ANBU jumped. Uchiha Itachi. Hinata's pulse quickened and she connected the dots in an instant. That explained the strange sense of familiarity. Not only did the man resemble Sasuke, he was an infamous S-rank missing nin. At Hinata's medical orientation, he had been listed as a Category 5, someone who all medic nin should flee at the sight of, regardless of whether any wounded remained on site. 3 other ANBU had already appeared as backup, and Hinata knew if she let it go on much longer, she could very well be facing an entire platoon agents who'd be better spent out fighting on the field, instead of trying to arrest an already half-dead man. Please, I give my word as a medic, that this man is in no condition to be a threat to anyone, said Hinata. Uchiha Itachi is a master of deception, the ANBU snapped. Stand down, medic. Hinata hesitated. Regardless of the man's identity or past, he was dying and needed immediate medical attention. However, be as it may, in the face of hierarchy, the opinion of a mere Chunin carried very little weight. She lowered the man's body to the ground, and in an instant the ANBU swarmed him. When Naruto had last left his apartment, he had walked through a crowded, bustling marketplace filled with the sounds of villagers going about their daily routine. Here and there, he'd attracted whispers and sometimes glares, and he'd caught bits and pieces of mundane conversations about everyday lives. Now, as he returned to his apartment, the way was silent, punctuated only by the occasional shouts of passing scouts and medics. The last of the fires had only just been put out, not a single part of the village was untouched. From what he'd overheard at the hospital, there were at least several hundred dead, mostly Chunin. While they had managed to capture some enemy ninja, it would take the intelligence division some time before they could extract any useful information, and by then, some worried, it would be too late. The outlook for the Hidden Leaf was grim. And at this time, when they needed strong leadership the most, the Hokage was dead. The situation couldn't have been any worse. Ironically enough, beyond the dark smoke still clouding the Hidden Leaf, the skies were clear and blue. It was a beautiful day. The way home had long been ingrained into Naruto's muscles. Step by step, he passed through the smoking ruin of the village. Even without the familiar landmarks to guide his way, it didn't take long for Naruto to find his apartment. Or rather, what remained of it. A chunk from an adjacent building had crashed straight through it. The only thing left now was a pile of bricks. All of his possessions, few as they were his books, his spare tanto, were gone. He hadn't considered that his apartment would have been reduced to a pile of rubble. But, he supposed, there was no reason why it would have been spared. Sitting down on a lone slab of rock, Naruto rested his head on his knuckles. A breeze swept through the area, and he closed his eyes. His head, once full of an unending cycle of questions, felt clear at last. Naruto had never really understood why he, of all people, had been the fourth Hokage's son. Why he'd been made into a Jinchuriki, and why his teammates had died. Why, even now, he continues to live and breathe. But as it turned out, the answer he'd been searching for was something very simple. There was nothing Naruto could do about what had happened to him. He was killed, sometimes because his mission required it, and at times unnecessarily. His teammates had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and paid for it with their lives. Kakashi, too, should have died, but he had been fortunate enough that someone who could heal him had been there, in the right place, at the right time. Or maybe, it was because Naruto had once decided on a whim to help a starving girl. The bottom line was, there was no rhyme or reason as to why things happened. There were only consequences, and whoever was left afterwards had no choice but to pick up after the rubble. It was a cruel and unfair world. Did it have to be that way? Opening his eyes, Naruto raised his gaze to the sky. The vast blue was starting to take on an orange sheen as the sun began to set. Tomorrow as well, the sun will rise and set. While the leaf may have been in mourning, the world would continue to move. Slowly, Naruto raised a hand to his chest. The void was still there, and perhaps it was true that nothing would ever be able to fill it up. But despite everything, Kakashi was alive. And at that moment, Naruto was glad to be too. Chapter 42, My Answer. The once vibrantly lit Hidden Leaf Village had fallen into darkness. The gates were slammed shut, and Niken prowled the perimeter. A new sensing barrier had been erected around the ruined walls. Would-be visitors were turned away by Border Patrol, while exit permits were put on temporary hiatus. With the end of the invasion, news had quickly spread of the third Hokage's death, and the village entered lockdown mode. Within the village itself, uninjured genin were instructed to guide newly homeless citizens toward shelters for aid, while able-bodied chunin and jonin were divided into squads and given direction to either assist in rebuilding or gathering intelligence. As the torture and interrogation force, led by the infamously scarred Ibiki, headed off to one block of the Intelligence Division's prison, members of the analysis team splintered off to various different sectors. Their leader, Yamanaka Inoichi, was curiously absent. His only daughter just died in the hospital, whispered one agent to another. Poison, I heard. None of the Sannin they interrogated knew what the antidote was. With that, they directed a nasty glare towards their cell's solitary inhabitant, a rusty-haired young man with dark-rimmed eyes. When the other cells were bursting to the seams with captives, his special treatment was due to the fact that he was the host of a tailed beast. However, while appropriate measures had been made to contain him if things got out of hand, Gaara of the Hidden Sand had thus far been unexpectedly quiet in his shackles. In fact, he seemed to be spending most of his time meditating. The report said he killed his own sister, said the agent. I guess it's true what they say about these Jinchuriki. Makes you wonder why we don't just lock ours up. Shut up, warned his fellow agent, gesturing to the cell. Gaara's eyes had opened, and he glowered at them now. Even with the bars of the cell separating the young man from the agents, they felt a shiver run down their backs. Don't go giving us that look now, said the agent with a scowl. You're only safe now while the top brass decides what to do with you. As had become the norm, Gaara didn't respond. His face didn't move. If it weren't for the sheen of the light in his eyes, he would have looked like a corpse. Through the night, Gaara continued to bide his time. Thinking. Clouds filled the sky and hid the moon. It was a dark night, doubly so with the absence of the light that usually emanated from the village. The only lights now were that of the hospital, and the torchlights of the sentries pacing the walls. While your average civilian may have balked for Jiraiya, it was a more than welcome sight. Less people walking about and limited visibility simply made it easier than ever to leave without attracting unwanted attention. Especially when he'd had a hard enough time shaking the ANBU on his tail as it was. Sending a shadow clone ahead to distract the nearest sentry, Jiraiya nimbly scaled the wall. Reaching the top, he stood still for a moment, listening to the wind. It was so dark, he couldn't even see the village rooftops anymore. Or at least, whatever remained of them. The village would be all right, he told himself. He'd done his duty. The village would suffer for a while, but it would be all right. It always was. I leave it to you. That had been the third's final words for Jiraiya. No doubt, he had wanted him to finally settle down as Hokage. However, Jiraiya thought that, with the fresh blood on his hands, he deserved a break. A long one, where he could write, drink, and enjoy a fair woman's company, not necessarily in that order. And anyways, he would be a terrible Hokage, Jiraiya tried to reason with himself. He didn't belong in that tiny office, signing papers and ordering people around from afar. He needed to be out there on the field, gathering intelligence for the village, as he'd always done. He could just imagine the look on the third's face, disappointed. Sorrowful. Still, Sarutobi-sensei would have understood. Goodbye, he said. The wind carried his voice away into the black night. In the distance, a Nikin perked its ears and barked up at the wall. But there was no one there. As soon as the Chiraku Ramen came into view, Naruto let out an exhale. Somehow, mercifully, the building had been left more or less intact. Even if it had been destroyed, the popularity of the ramen stall ensured that it would have been rebuilt. Nonetheless, there was something reassuring about it, at the very least, having survived the invasion. However, as Naruto grew closer, he realized that the lights were off and that a sign had been placed outside. Closed until further notice during morning period. Thank you for understanding. Cat got your tongue? Came an unfamiliar voice. Naruto blinked and looked to his right. It took a moment to place the source, a toad, perched just beside the sign, its pebbly skin blending right into the ground. It was holding a scroll in its tongue, which it offered up to Naruto as soon as he'd spotted it. After a moment's hesitation, and a quick check to ensure that it wasn't booby-trapped, Naruto opened it to reveal a parchment filled with beautiful calligraphy. He instantly recognized the handwriting. It was Jiraiya's, and he knew in an instant what it meant. Jiraiya was leaving the village. While unfortunate for the leaf, it wasn't difficult to ascertain his reasons. As a Jonin, Naruto had been allowed to read the full report. While stopping Gaara had played a big role in ending the invasion, one of the other main players had been Jiraiya, who had finally slayed Orochimaru. Though Naruto didn't know the entire history behind the rift that had broken up the trio of sages, he knew how difficult the decision must have been for Jiraiya. Against all odds, Naruto had been hoping Jiraiya would stick around afterwards, but the sage wasn't called a hermit for nothing. From the sounds of it, however, the other ninja had been expecting Jiraiya to take up the Hokage position. The question was, with the man gone, who would step up to take the reins? The toad that had delivered Jiraiya's message had an interesting body composition. Its own middle section appeared to be made up of a scroll, no doubt. It was related to the other part of Jiraiya's letter. Once he'd committed the letter to memory, Naruto gestured towards the toad, which jumped towards his face. In a single leap, it wriggled into his mouth, and he swallowed it. Resisting the urge to throw it back up, Naruto wiped the slime from his lips. Suddenly, from the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of movement in Bu. Were they following him? Acting as though he hadn't seen, Naruto moved on. However, now that he was aware that he was being tailed, he soon picked up on two others within the vicinity that followed his every move. It seemed the time had come at last. He would have to confront that which he had been putting off for the past several years, his destiny. But unlike before, Naruto could feel resolve smoldering in his chest. Unlike before, he knew he was ready. Who are you? Someone who's going to change this world. Funerals were a terrible ordeal for everyone involved. While it was their chance to send off the deceased, it also made their absences feel all the more acute. The entire village had turned up for the massive event. Even the wounded had hobbled out in crutches and wheelchairs to pay their respects. There wasn't a single person who hadn't lost a family member or a friend. Hinata felt her heart tremble when she caught sight of Memba's pale face. His own face heavily bandaged, he'd come to find her, begging her to help Ino. Unfortunately, she had already been in her final death throes. The moment Hinata activated her Byakugan, She knew the poison had spread too far, shutting down all her systems. The most she could do for her former classmate had been to ease some of the pain before she succumbed to it entirely. Ino's teammates, Shikamaru and Choji, appeared to be at a loss for words. Ino wasn't the only familiar face staring down at her from the wall of the deceased. Her old teammate, Kiba, and her academy teacher, Irika, had also been killed in action. When Hinata saw Akamaru at the edge of the crowd, his ears and tail drooping, she took him into her arms and finally began to cry. The orders from above had been abrupt and to the point. Keep the Jinchuriki, Uzumaki Naruto, under constant surveillance. Avoid detection at all costs. Do not engage in combat. The target is a trained sage. If the target tries to leave the village, alert the Hokage immediately. Fortunately, their target appeared to be suffering from chakra exhaustion. Aside from visiting a jonin in the hospital, he spent most of his time sleeping. Oddly enough, while most of his colleagues made use of the relief shelters, the target seemed to prefer sleeping outside. That, however, was the only notable observation made after 2 full days of surveillance. Though his 2 fellow route operatives didn't seem overly concerned, Sai knew better than to lower his guard. Though he hadn't interacted with the target since their mission to Wave Country, the target had left a more than lasting impression. Of course, he kept such thoughts to himself. That was why, on the dawn of the 3rd day, when Sai suddenly realized he couldn't reach the other 2 route members, he wasn't too surprised to feel a cold blade suddenly press itself to the back of his neck. "Why am I being followed?" said his target into his ear. "You know why," was his only response. A pause. "Where are they holding the captives from Grass Country?" Sai thought about it, and then told him. Idly, as he waited for the finishing blow, he thought about the picture book he never managed to finish. Instead of a searing pain across his neck, however, he felt something hard hit his head. Bright circles filled his field of vision, and then nothing. As Kakashi left the hospital, he thought he could count himself among the more fortunate ones. While he may have been missing an eye, not only did he still have all 4 limbs attached, but they were also fully functioning. Others, some being forcefully discharged by the looks of it, to make room for incoming wounded, were not so well off. Even with medical ninjutsu on hand, there was a limit to what their medics could heal. More often than not, the grim expressions of the discharged indicated a long and laborious recovery, if not outright early retirement. A man with a bowl cut was waiting for Kakashi outside the hospital. 48 to 48, said the man. He reached out and gripped Kakashi tightly by the shoulder. It had been several months since Kakashi had last seen Might Guy and his team, who had been sent out on a long-term mission. "Your team?" Guy inquired. "I didn't see their names, but—" "Safe," said Kakashi. "Your team?" Guy nodded. "We're fine. We came back as soon as we heard the news." He shook his head, his face grim. "I can't help but think, if we were here when it happened." "The Lord Third considered your case, and made the decision to prioritize your team's mission," said Kakashi. "He didn't expect the village to be overrun like this. Nobody did." Looking around, Guy drew to the corner, and Kakashi followed. In a low voice, Guy murmured, "I just don't understand. The sensing barrier, our agents on the perimeter, how did something this big get past us? The working theory right now is that the enemy planted sleeper agents among us." Guy exhaled. "Hence the village being shut down. While it's unfortunate, I see why it's a necessary measure. Still, about the 3rd successor, I can't believe it." Kakashi arched an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" His footsteps sounded quietly through the hallway, attracting the guard's notice. At the sight of his face, the guard jumped to attention. "Sir, you're back. I didn't get the notice. I thought you were supposed to be out until tomorrow." Keeping his face stern, he waved the guard off. "In this time of great need, I cannot vacate my post any longer." "Of course, sir, if you could just show your identification." Fixing the guard with a cool stare, he replied, "Enough. There is no time to waste. I need to examine the captive. Alone." The guard gulped. He was new to this station, but he'd heard the rumors about the analysis team's leader. Though outwardly he didn't strike as imposing a figure as Ibiki, Yamanaka Inoichi's skills in analysis and interrogation were an invaluable asset to the village. Yes, sir, said the guard, hastily unlocking the door. Unbeknownst to him, as Yamanaka and Noichi walked past, he let go of a kunai hidden in his waist holster. He knew exactly where to go, expertly navigating the maze of corridors. When he finally came to a stop, he stood in front of a lone cell holding a single captive. A young female with crimson hair eagerly pressed her face against the bars, her hands and feet otherwise bound in chains. Naruto! She exclaimed in delight. Without releasing his hinge, Naruto nodded. Of course, Karen would be able to see through his disguise. Her sensory skills were truly on a different level from anyone he'd ever met before. I'm sorry I couldn't come earlier, he said, holding his hands behind his back. But at the moment, all foreign ninja are being held for questioning. I told them everything I know, Karen replied instantly. Which wasn't much. So the hidden grass wasn't a part of the invasion? Karen shook her head. No. At least, not that I know of. And you don't know anything about the Akatsuki? With a look of regret, Karen shook her head again. No. I'm sorry. Nobody will believe me, but it's true. Naruto nodded. At the very least, he believed her. With her actions on the battlefield, she had proved herself more than trustworthy. I wanted to thank you for saving my teacher. I owe you a big debt. To his surprise, Karen's eyes filled with tears. That's the first time anyone's ever thanked me. That gave Naruto some pause. While he knew now how gifted the girl from Grass Country was, he knew next to nothing about her background or her past. But, he thought, he wanted to learn. He wanted to learn more about Karen, about Gaara, about the other Jinchuriki. He wanted to know more about the world this time, not from his own lonely perspective, but from the perspective of others. Shouts began to sound a distance away, echoing through the empty halls. Had they finally discovered his ruse? You have to leave, said Karen, her tone frightened. They're coming not for me. For you. I know, he replied. Everything was so clear to Naruto now. If his journey with Jiraiya had taught Naruto anything, it was that the world was large and filled with possibilities. If Kakashi's survival had shown him anything, it was that life was fleeting. After years of searching, he knew now what he wanted. This system of sealing tailed beasts into innocence and forcing Jinchuriki to act under the village's bidding. The world of shinobi, where figures lurked in the shadows and involved innocence in their struggle for power. This world in which his teammates had perished, in which his teachers suffered daily from guilt and despair. We endure. Naruto had had enough of it. Who are you? Someone who's going to change the world. That was what the masked man had said. But in Naruto's opinion, a world created by such a man would be no better than the current one. And as much as he had once resented being made the host of the Nine Tails, he knew now that it gave him the ability to make a difference. Naruto extended a hand towards Karen. I'm going to destroy this world. Will you join me? Without any hesitation, Karen reached through the bars and took his hand. Deep underground, a lone man kneeled in an isolated cell. While he was already practically blind, he had been blindfolded, with a seal written on the cloth, and each limb was bound in chains. The cell had just enough space for the man to lie down comfortably. The thick concrete walls had no doors or windows, and was further surrounded by two barriers, each manned by 4 ANBU that alternated on 12-hour shifts. This was just the security visible to the naked eye. Numerous hidden seals further surrounded the perimeter, a last failsafe in the case of a catastrophe. Even with such a system in place, the ANBU appeared visibly on edge. They all knew the history of the man they were guarding, knew he could kill them all in the blink of an eye if he somehow managed to escape. Oddly enough, the man in question seemed perfectly content to remain in his cell. Indeed, several nights' worth of food and rest appeared to have restored some color to his gaunt cheeks. A long shadow extended along the corridor. Silently, an older man stepped in front of the cell. He was accompanied by 2 ANBU. Curiously, the ANBU captain currently standing guard had never seen either of their masks before. Lower the barrier, commanded the man. The captain nodded. Yes, Hokage-sama. Standing back, he signaled to his men. The flames of the first barrier flickered, lighting up a stern face swathed in bandages. Then it faded away, plunging the cell into darkness. Chapter 43: A World That Was Transparent. Blood-red Sharingan eyes peered out from the holes of the ANBU mask. Dead leaves blew in the unnatural wind sweeping through the deserted Uchiha complex. I witnessed everything. And I will continue to watch. If you so much as lay a hand on Sasuke, I will pass on classified village intel to every enemy nation. Leaving those last words, the man's cloaked frame suddenly swelled up and burst into ravens that flew away. An eerie, echoing cough filled the void. Damn you! Far from the scene that had once left Danzo in the humiliating position of being berated like an unruly academy child, he regarded the bound figure before him with burgeoning relief. On the tail end of disaster, one of the biggest threats to the Hidden Leaf had at last been neutralized. This is what has become of the great Uchiha Itachi, Danzo said, not bothering to disguise his distaste. At the sound of his voice, his prisoner raised his head. Despite the fact that he was blindfolded, the root agents at Danzo's back immediately drew their weapons. It was a pointless endeavor. The prison was virtually impossible to escape. Still, when nothing appeared to be separating Danzo and his agents from the infamous Uchiha, he would not blame them for being on edge. However, the Uchiha Itachi who had once left Danzo with a threat was no more. The man before him, shackled and bound, was a mere shadow of his previous self. Disease-ridden, from the looks of it, doubtless, a final hereditary gift from his inbreeding ancestors. At last, Danzo addressed him. My agents tell me you have something to say to me? My words are for the Hokage's ears only, responded Itachi, his voice hoarse and weak. The Lord Third is busy enough as it is, Danzo lied smoothly. Whatever you tell me will be conveyed to him. A beat passed. So the Hokage has passed, as I feared. Danzo felt his eyebrows rise. What leads you to that conclusion? The barriers imprisoning Itachi had sealed off all sound as well, effectively leaving him in isolation. Uchiha Itachi had always been famed for his genius, and the less information that reached the man, the better. I made enough of a public ruckus to ensure that news of my return would reach his ears. The fact that he isn't here can only mean he is either incapacitated or dead. Given the circumstances surrounding this village, I would assume the latter. Danzo scoffed. It seemed his efforts had been in vain. You Uchiha were always too clever for your own good. He spread his hands open. It is of little importance. Speak now, or take your secrets to the grave. Beneath the blindfold, Itachi's lips quivered back in what could have been mistaken for a smile in the dim light. Yes, I suppose it doesn't matter anymore. I came here to deliver information regarding Akatsuki, and its leader. It's a true leader. Shouts sounded and the torch lights on the walls flickered. Naruto could sense several bodies rapidly descending upon them with only one viable exit. They made no effort to hide their approach. Turning his gaze back to Karen, Naruto stepped back, drew his tanto and cut through the bars of the cell. Though he wasn't familiar with the necessary fuinjutsu to free Karen of her sealed restraints without hurting her, she would at least be able to move around, letting him concentrate on the coming battle. Naruto. Karen, you search for Gaara, he said. I'll take care of this. The words had just barely left his mouth when metal glinted, followed by swift movement. His pursuers were upon them already. As they came into view, the white animal masks of the ANBU hid their faces. Naruto remembered years ago, when they had last come for him. They had scooped him up, struggling, and dumped him unceremoniously in the Hokage's office, where he had learned he would become a ninja. Though he had feared them at first, they had been his allies. Lightning crackled. Naruto dispatched the first two who reached him with 2 swings of his tanto. The third met a similar fate, but just as the metal plunged into his chest, the man squeezed his muscles, trapping the blade. Without pause, Naruto released the hilt, and pierced through the 4th ANBU's chest with a chakra-reinforced hand. As he ripped his bloodied hand out, the 5th brushed him and a current of lightning chakra surged through Naruto, passing to the man and frying him on the spot. The stink of singed flesh fouled the air, and the last ANBU's mask slipped off with a clatter, revealing a middle-aged man with nondescript features. For some reason, the ANBU always seemed strangely vulnerable once unmasked. Something metallic on his forehead gleamed in the torchlight. Despite himself, Naruto stared, struck by the realization that it was his first time killing a ninja that wore the same aid as himself. There had been too many of them, and too little time, to have mercy, and his old self would have done it without a second thought. But suddenly, the face of the nameless Leaf agent he'd discovered dead in the safe house with Hinata flashed through his mind, and Naruto wondered if they had ever crossed paths before, if they had ever sat in his usual stool at Ichiraku for a bowl of miso ramen. "I've found Gaara," Karen announced, her nose wrinkling at the smell. Naruto straightened up, his gaze lingering on the face of the ANBU. "Naruto?" Tearing his eyes away, he motioned for her to lead. "Let's go." There really was no turning back now. But he had already known this when he had made his decision. The way ahead was clear, his heart was steady. Gaara couldn't sleep. At least, not for long. Mother lurking just beyond the horizon of unconsciousness ensured that. And now, he couldn't even close his eyes. Not without seeing a sandy-haired figure staring back at him accusingly. "Gaara! Stop!" Not without hearing her last words ringing in his head. Something in his chest throbbed. Why had he lashed out then? Gaara couldn't stop replaying the scene in his head. Over the years, as freely as he'd killed, he'd always made sure to not lay a hand on his siblings. But why? What made them so special? There was a voice whispering in Gaara's head. It wasn't Mother's voice, it was something much quieter. It sounded like his own voice, and he didn't know what to make of it. "Gaara!" Metal clinked as his hands jerked up against his chains to try and block his ears. But he couldn't bring them close enough, and the chain groaned against his pulling. "Stop that immediately!" demanded his guard, banging on the bars of his cell with a baton. "Gaara! Stop!" His chains clinked once again, to no avail. "Gaara!" "You stop," he replied hoarsely. "We're here to get you out of here." Startled, Gaara looked up. The guard's face was frozen, and behind the man, Gaara saw two faces staring back at him. One was a girl with bright red hair, and the other was the Leaf Nin who had managed to defeat him. Unlike the girl who eyed Gaara with a familiar expression of revulsion and fear, the latter wore an oddly inquisitive look on his face. As Gaara watched, the guard crumpled to the ground, and an oppressive feeling lifted from his shoulders. The barrier that had been containing his cell faded away. It seemed the rest had been similarly dispatched. Gaara focused on the Leaf Nin. "Why are you helping me?" The Leaf Nin stepped closer, wrapping a hand around the bars. "I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I'm a Jinchuriki, just like you." A Jinchuriki. While the word was new to Gaara's tongue, he was no stranger to its meaning. He had known for a long time now that there were others like him, though this was his first time coming face to face with one. However, the Leaf Nin was wrong in saying that he was just like Gaara. One look at the girl beside him, and he could tell. "You're nothing like me," he said. They'd taken his gourd of sand, but far beneath them, Gaara could feel the bedrock trembling. The Leaf Nin raised his brows, and the girl beside him frowned. "We don't need him, Naruto. He's unstable, he'll only slow you down." She was the one who had used those chains on him before, Gaara realized with a body-racking shudder. The red from the pool of blood around the fallen guard was seeping into his vision, and the voices in his head were growing louder. "Blood? Gaara!" Crack! The ground at his feet began to splinter. The Leaf Nin stepped away from the bars. "I'm not here to fight you, or to win your trust. Kill them both." "Gaara! Stop! If you're going to escape, go now, before backup arrives. Before they can kill us, kill them both." "Stop! Stop!" The whole world was almost covered in the red haze now, and Gaara felt something in his chest coiling so tightly, it burned him from the inside out. The voices in his head, the aching in his heart. It was too much. He just wanted to be alone. But it was too late. Gaara could feel the beast inside of him surging up again. His head felt like it was splitting. "Get away from me," he managed to grit out, "before I kill you too." Suddenly, something hard hit the back of his neck, and he felt his eyes roll back from the impact. The world quickly turned black. The last thing he realized before he lost consciousness was the face of the Leaf Nin looming over him, and the sound of chains clinking in the darkness. "Uchiha Madara?" Danzo echoed in disbelief. Impossible. That is the name the man goes by, said Itachi. I have never seen his face. But I have witnessed his power, and he is a real threat to the hidden Liafa as well as to the rest of the world. Danzo's sharp gaze raked over his prisoner. You have gone mad. Mad? Itachi began to cough, spraying the ground with dark specks of blood. Once he had finished, his lips pushed up into a thin smile. Perhaps. But you and I both know that I speak the truth. After all, you have your own network of spies. Through their eyes, you have seen how quickly Akatsuki's influence has spread. Uchiha Madara was known for many things, but immortality was not one of them, Danzo stated evenly. He steepled his fingers together. Still, I will play your game for now. Let us say that Uchiha Madara somehow fooled the first Hokage and escaped death. What is his plan for the Jinchuriki? Most of the other members of Akatsuki are following the man calling himself Pain. They are not even aware of Madara's role as puppet master. They believe they will use the Jinchuriki to threaten the world into a time of peace. However, I believe Madara's true plan to be much more sinister than Pain's. A shadow came over Itachi's expression. That man does not have nearly as much faith in mankind. Danzo opened his mouth to respond when a flurry of motion interrupted him. One of his subordinates suddenly appeared, his head bowed in deference. I gave orders to be left alone, he said coldly. My apologies, Hokage-sama, said his agent. But both of the Jinchuriki have escaped. The hospital had run out of space, and they had hastily set up 2 medical tents in its periphery. The sound of groans was deafening. The smell of infection thickened the air. Hinata had been awake for the last 49 hours now, and her chakra levels had never been so low. She'd long since passed the maximum advised dosage of chakra pills. Somehow, they were still finding wounded throughout the village, though the surging flow had finally slowed down to a steady trickle over the past day. Except for the short break of the funeral, Hinata had worked nonstop since the end of the invasion. She had been able to save many, though a handful had been beyond any help. They're bringing in another one, cried a voice. The medic working in the bay besides Hinata grumbled, great. Another half-dead Chunin. Hinata returned her focus to her current patient. Or trying to the floor was starting to sway beneath her feet, like a fishing boat at sea. Soon, her team leader's voice came floating from somewhere nearby. Hinata, can you take the next patient? My bays are all full. After that one, you can take a break. Yes, of course, I'm almost done, Hinata replied automatically. The needle she was pulling through the patient's scalp shook in her hand. This man needs to be seen immediately, said a new male voice. He's lost too much blood. Holding back a sigh, Hinata looked up and froze. Dark hair, pale skin. For a moment, she thought she was once again looking into the face of Uchiha Itachi, no doubt back for vengeance. But then the floor steadied and the moment passed, and she realized the young man standing before her was a little too young and much too healthy for that to be the case. Sasuke, she started, before stopping herself. At the sound of his name, his dark eyes shot up to her in belated recognition. Hinata. I didn't realize that was you. As tired as she was, Hinata didn't miss the way he'd stumbled over her name, nor did it surprise her. She'd always been a wallflower in the academy, after all. The bigger issue was that when Hinata had turned over Uchiha Itachi to the ANBU at the hospital, they had warned her not to inform anyone of the fugitive's presence. Now she had to wonder. Did that warning extend to the only other living Uchiha in the village? A blood-red Sharingan eye peered out alone from under a leaf Hittite. Dark blood streamed down the other side of the man's face. I tried using Kodoama Tsukumi to stop the coup d'etat, but Danzo stole my right eye. He doesn't trust me. He intends to protect the village on his own, by any and all means. Before that happens, let me give it to you. Sure, Sway. Without any hesitation, the man's fingers plunged into his eye socket. You, my best friend, are the only one I can count on. Protect this village and the Uchiha name. The urgent news brought to Danzo, and his resultant shock, was the disruption Itachi had been waiting for. He had returned to the village fully expecting to be imprisoned now. With the barriers lowered and Danzo distracted, it was time for him to make his last move. Danzo had been wasting his time sealing Itachi's eyes, when he was already well and truly blind. It was the price he had willingly paid to use his Mangekyo over the years. That, and the sickness that had ravaged his body, was his punishment for his sins, a punishment far lighter than the one he deserved. Itachi felt his throat swell up, and something soft brushed his palate, and then it was gone, expelled into the open air. He could see it in his mind's eye. A crow, was Shirsoi's last legacy glistening in its black feathers. What? Danzo's voice began in alarm. You will love and serve not only the Hidden Leaf Village, but all of its people as well, Itachi commanded. To your dying breath, you will live by the will of fire. The crow squawked, and as the room fell silent, Itachi knew it had worked. At last, he thought. Shirsoi's sacrifice hadn't all been for naught. Through the intense relief, the clock that had temporarily been frozen began to tick once more. His lungs burning up, Itachi began to cough, and the dark world around him started to spin. With another stab of pain, he felt the last of his muscles give way, and he collapsed onto the cold floor. The village was bathed in red and orange from the sun when Kakashi first heard the news. His time in the ANBU had left him with a pair of eyes and ears in every sector of the village, and it had paid off time and time again. This time was no different. The shrill cries of cicadas surged in the hot temperature as a voice whispered in his ear. His mouth turned dry. With the third gone, Kakashi had expected changes. When Danzo was announced as the successor, he braced himself for changes. But this was too sudden, too drastic. Naruto had broken out 2 prisoners? And killed over a dozen Leaf agents in the process? Kakashi shook his head. There has to be an explanation. This makes no sense. He wouldn't do that without good reason. Tell that to the bodies I saw left behind, said the agent darkly. No word from the Hokage yet, though. With this, I reckon it's going to be a kill on sight. In the distance, a loud siren began to sound. A flock of birds burst out of the nearby trees. With a salute, the agent left, leaving Kakashi alone with his increasingly frantic thoughts. Pacing back and forth, he raised a hand to his chin, and then lowered it. He looked up at the sky, and then back down at the ground. He stopped. He exhaled. Then, he bit into his thumb. Kuchiyos no Jutsu, summoning technique. In a cloud of smoke, several Niken dogs appeared. At its head, a disgruntled-looking pug looked up at him in alarm. What's the matter, Kakashi? I need you all to find Naruto, he said. Now. For once, Pakken didn't protest at Kakashi's tone of voice, leaping immediately to action. The Niken began to sniff the ground, and Kakashi was suddenly struck with the realization that he had no idea what to say if he were to confront his student. He's using clones to throw off his scent, said Pakken grimly. It'll take some time to narrow down the real one. Kakashi stopped his pacing. Of course Naruto would have had the foresight to confuse the Niken. He wouldn't have expected any less of his student. Suddenly, Kakashi knew exactly where Naruto wanted him to be. Change of plans. Update the rest of my team on the situation, he instructed Pakken. Tell them they are not, in any circumstance, to try and chase down Naruto. Roger that. As Pakken began to swiftly race towards the village walls, Kakashi headed the other way. The majority of the villagers appeared to have no idea what was going on. Even with the village in near ruin, it seemed daily life had to press onwards. Hey, Kakashi guy just barely managed to get out, before Kakashi passed him. The training ground soon came into view, before passing. Another field came into view this time, filled with rows of white tombstones. In the distance, a lone red-headed figure waited for him. As Kakashi drew closer, the figure turned around. Sensei. You came. Naruto seemed calmer than he would have expected of a newly minted fugitive on the run, but then again, it was Naruto. You're a clone, aren't you? Yes. And you're leaving? Yes. Is it true that you killed multiple Leaf agents? Naruto inclined his head. They were coming after me under Danzo's orders. Kakashi sighed, his body suddenly heavy. What a mess. Even though he had always known that the third Hokage had been the benefactor of Naruto's freedom, he hadn't expected his successor to spearhead the very opposite philosophy. It wasn't that he couldn't understand Danzo's fears, However, the thought of a Jinchuriki as powerful as Naruto running around freely would surely have made anyone break out into a sweat. His face as unreadable as ever, Naruto rested his hand on a tombstone. The light illuminated the characters carved into the smooth stone face again Rai, and for a moment, the two of them silently regarded each other. Then Naruto spoke. Sensei, you told me once that as ninjas, we have to endure. What did you mean by that? In an instant, Kakashi remembered exactly what he was referring to. When his teammates had died and Naruto had lost control over the Nine Tails, Kakashi had been frantic at the time. It seemed Naruto had taken his words to heart. We're often not as alone as we think we are, Naruto. Naruto slowly nodded. So come with me, Sensei. With Danzo as Hokage, this isn't the same hidden leaf anymore. I know you must be as tired of this system, of this world, as I am. Together, we can do something about it. The cicadas' cries were louder than usual that day, or perhaps Kakashi just hadn't been listening before. Though the trees that they usually clung to were on the far end of the cemetery, their cries seemed about to swallow them. A memory, a shade flickered before Kakashi. A young boy, sitting apart from his two teammates, spoke up out of the blue. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I plan on becoming the next Hokage. Did you know, Naruto? He began. I was assigned to Kushina-san's guard when she was pregnant with you. The last time I ever saw her or Minato-sensei again was the day before the Nine Tails attacked. Watching the two squabble back and forth, Kakashi chortled. You all rather remind me of my own team back in the day. Curiosity filling his expression, Naruto looked up at him. What was your team like, sensei? My teammate, Obito, died saving me. My other teammate, Rin, died at my hands. His face pinched with dismay, Naruto spread his arms wide open. Even Mayu and Rai would turn their backs on me if they knew, and you know it. Kakashi paused. I haven't turned my back on you. You're different, sensei. When I was young, my father returned from a mission in disgrace. It was too much for him to bear, and soon afterwards, he took his own life. His face contorted, Naruto clutched his chest. How do you deal with it, sensei? Kakashi inclined his head. We endure. What I'm trying to say is what you say is true, Kakashi admitted. Through this terrible world, I've lost almost everyone I love. Then you'll come with me? Kakashi stopped. And for a long moment, he considered it. But he already knew the answer in his heart. How had they come to this moment? When had their paths first begun to diverge? Those years ago, during the Chunin exams in Wind Country, when Naruto had been reeling from the side effects of the taboo seal, had Kakashi been wrong to tell him the truth? His heart heavy with regret, Kakashi shook his head. The hidden leaf needs me, now more than ever. As expected, Naruto didn't respond. The setting sun cast his shadow, dark and jagged, across the face of another tombstone Kamizuki Mayu. While Kakashi didn't know what Naruto's plans were, from the look of newfound conviction in his eyes, it had to be something beyond anything he could think of. And it would be dangerous. Kakashi thought of how Naruto had appeared, panicked, on the battlefield to save them, and he felt a pang. As much faith as Kakashi had in his students' capabilities, as much as Naruto was a Jinchurikai, was not indestructible. Nobody was. A word of advice for you, Naruto. Your mother and her Jinchuriki predecessor were both Uzumaki, and they both used chains to control the Nine Tails, not unlike that Karen girl. That drew a look of faint surprise from Naruto. Karen? After the hidden whirlpool was destroyed, most of the survivors moved to the hidden leaf, most, but not all. I wouldn't be surprised if Karen is one of their descendants. I'll keep that in mind. Straightening, Naruto looked at Kakashi squarely. I'm glad we were able to visit their graves together. It struck Kakashi that they were now the exact same height. We'll meet again, he said. After all, I owe you a rematch. I hope so, came the response. Goodbye, sensei. There was a note of finality to Naruto's tone, as though he had looked into the future and predetermined their fates. Their divergent paths, where would they lead? Take care, Naruto, said Kakashi. With one last lingering look down at the graves, Naruto's clone disappeared in a gust of wind, and Kakashi suddenly found himself alone. The sirens from the village were growing louder. As the sound mixed with the shrill screams of cicadas in his ears, he realized something that not even for a moment had he considered stopping Naruto. He didn't know how much time had passed, when the bindings that had weighed heavily on his limbs seemed to fade away. As if doused in water, his burning body grew cold, and then all of a sudden, he found himself floating in a pitch-black world. All the pain was gone. For the first time in a long time, it no longer hurts. Was this death? If so, he welcomed it. He had long since prepared himself for this moment. He had passed on all the information he had. He had completed his duty, heedless of the sacrifices laid in its wake. That had always been his greatest flaw, he thought. He could only ever see the forest and not the trees, and maybe in that aspect, he wasn't as different from his enemies as he would have liked. He did have just one regret. Time. If only he had had just a little more of it. If only he had spent just a little less time training, and a little more with his family. But there was nothing he could do about it now. Sorry, Sasuke, maybe next time. Thanks for watching. I hope you had as much fun as I did putting this epic what if together. Make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a single twist in the story. Drop your thoughts, theories, or even wild ideas in the comments. I read every single one. And hey, if you're craving more awesome Naruto content, go check out the other videos on the channel. I've got plenty of heat waiting for you. Until next time, stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember, even a shadow clone needs love. Peace out.